Elon Musk had seen it all. As one of the most recognized names in the world, he was no stranger to attention. Whether it was the paparazzi or business moguls wanting his advice, Elon always had an audience. But nothing could prepare him for the moment when a young voice broke through the bustle of the city streets, sharply interrupting his lunch. He had been walking through the crowded sidewalk, the midday sun casting shadows on the buildings of Silicon Valley. His mind was preoccupied with the latest venture, SpaceX's upcoming launch, and 1,000 other thoughts raced through his mind. He was about to take a bite of his sandwich, a simple turkey club from a nearby deli, when the shout cut through the air. "Don't eat that." Elon froze, mid-bite, his eyes scanning the crowd for the source of the unexpected command. A few people around him stopped too, some turning toward the voice, others unsure whether it was some kind of prank. But Elon's eyes quickly landed on the boy. The child couldn't have been older than 12. His clothes were tattered, his shoes barely held together with frayed laces, and his face was dirty, with a layer of dust that looked like it had accumulated over days, maybe weeks. He was thin, his hair messy, and there was an air of urgency in his gaze as he stood across the street, shouting towards Elon. "Don't eat that," the boy repeated, his voice hoarse but full of conviction. Elon's heart skipped a beat. The oddity of the situation seemed to demand his attention. Was this some kind of street performance? A homeless kid trying to make a point? Or perhaps a warning, something more serious? But why? "Hey, kid, you okay?" Elon called out, his brow furrowed. He looked around, but most of the people in the vicinity were already moving on, uninterested in the scene unfolding. The boy didn't respond to the question directly. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed at Elon's sandwich. "It's not safe. Don't eat it. Trust me." The words hung in the air, more perplexing than ever. Elon felt his stomach tighten, not from hunger, but from a growing sense of unease. He had been around people who had tried to warn him about things in the past, whether it was market trends or technology crashes. But this felt different. This wasn't some business pitch or investment advice. This was something strange. "Who are you?" Elon asked, his voice softening, curiosity taking over. "Why should I listen to you?" The boy hesitated for a moment, scanning the crowd as if checking for any signs of danger. Then, in a quieter voice, he spoke again. "There's something wrong with it. What you're eating, it's part of something bigger, something you don't understand." Elon's mind immediately raced, trying to piece the fragments together. What's this kid talking about? It was just a sandwich, nothing more, nothing less. Was he suggesting some kind of food poisoning? A scam? A joke? Yet, something in the boy's eyes told him it wasn't just random paranoia. "Are you hungry?" Elon asked, trying to shift the conversation, trying to gauge the situation better. "You look like you could use something to eat." The boy glanced at him, his eyes narrowing slightly. It was a moment of hesitation. Then, as if something clicked, he lowered his voice and said, "I'm not hungry in the way you think. But that sandwich you're holding? It's not the right thing for you." Elon's mind churned with questions, but before he could ask more, the boy turned away and started walking quickly down the street, his ragged figure blending into the crowd. There was no time for further words, no explanations, no reassurances. Just a cryptic warning that felt like it had more weight than it should. The people around Elon began moving again, as if nothing unusual had happened. He stared at the sandwich in his hand, suddenly unsure of what to do with it. The bustling energy of the city continued on around him, people lost in their own worlds, distracted by their own problems. But Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been set in motion. A voice echoed in his mind. What did that kid mean? He looked down the street, but the boy was already gone, swallowed by the city. A wave of confusion settled over him. A homeless child, shouting warnings about food. What could possibly be the connection? Elon thought about his endless projects and responsibilities, his innovations, and the people he interacted with daily. He had been at the forefront of some of the most groundbreaking technological advancements, yet here he was, faced with a mystery that felt both too absurd and too serious to ignore. Taking a deep breath, he shook his head, trying to dismiss the strange encounter. But something told him he wouldn't be able to forget it. Not that easily. And that's when it hit him. What if the kid wasn't just crazy? What if he was telling the truth? Shaking off the thought, Elon checked his phone. The usual messages from his team were waiting, nothing out of the ordinary. A quick glance at the news headlines confirmed what he expected. Updates on Tesla's new vehicle release, SpaceX's progress, and the usual updates about his businesses. But none of it felt as urgent now. His mind kept drifting back to the boy's words. There was something wrong with the food. The more he thought about it, the more his curiosity grew. Was it possible? Was this kid trying to warn him about something he didn't yet understand? Without a second thought, Elon pocketed his sandwich and moved toward the alley where the boy had disappeared, hoping to find him. But when he reached the corner, there was no sign of the homeless kid. It felt like a dead end. No leads, no answers, just the haunting question left lingering in the air. What if he wasn't wrong? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk stood at the corner, staring into the empty space where the boy had just been. The street buzzed with the usual chaotic energy. People walking by, the hum of distant conversations, and the occasional honk of a car. Everything seemed normal again, but for some reason, nothing felt the same. He glanced at the sandwich still in his hand, the one the boy had warned him not to eat. For a moment, Elon debated whether to just toss it away, brush the whole thing off as some strange encounter with a mentally unstable person. After all, it wasn't the first time he'd encountered street preachers or conspiracy theorists. But there was something about the boy's eyes, the intensity and desperation, that made him pause. Was it just paranoia? Shaking his head, Elon took the sandwich and stuffed it back into its paper bag. He didn't want to eat it now. The strange warning had rattled him in a way he couldn't easily explain. Maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe it was nothing. But he had learned over the years, particularly with all of his ventures into the unknown, the reaches of space, artificial intelligence, even human longevity, that sometimes it was the unexpected, seemingly trivial moments that held the most significance. As he walked back toward his car, Elon found himself reflecting on the boy. Who was he? There was something about him, something deeper than just the typical homeless child on the street. His eyes had carried an intelligence, a sharpness that belied his rough exterior. It wasn't just the warning about food that had stuck with Elon, it was the fact that the boy had known something. There was no mistaking the urgency in his voice, like he had been trying to stop something far worse than a simple mistake. With a deep sigh, Elon decided to forget about it for the moment. He had too many things on his plate. His team needed him. SpaceX was preparing for its next big launch, and Tesla was just a step away from releasing a new line of vehicles that would change the market. He needed to focus on that, on the things he could control. But as he entered his car, his mind drifted back again. Was the kid a messenger of something more? 2 days later, Elon found himself on another street in the city, this time near his favorite cafe. He had come here to grab a coffee and get some work done. The weather was perfect, the sunlight filtering through the trees as he walked past familiar storefronts. But as he turned the corner to approach the cafe, something caught his eye. Someone. The same boy. The homeless child was sitting on the sidewalk, his back against a lamppost, staring at the passing crowd. This time, there was no shouting. He wasn't warning anyone. Instead, he was simply watching, his face unreadable. Elon's heart skipped a beat. The encounter 2 days ago flashed back into his mind. He didn't hesitate. He walked up to the boy, standing a few feet away. "Hey," Elon said, not wanting to startle him. You remember me?" The boy looked up slowly, and for a moment, Elon thought he would ignore him, but then the child's eyes locked onto his. A flicker of recognition passed across the boy's face. "I remember you," the boy said, his voice quieter than before. "I told you not to eat that sandwich." Elon nodded, a little taken aback by the boy's bluntness. "Yeah, you did. And I didn't. But I've been thinking about what you said." The boy said nothing, his eyes unwavering. "I don't know what you meant by it," Elon continued, "but I'm curious. Why did you warn me? What's so bad about the food?" The boy shifted slightly, eyes darting around as if checking for anyone listening. Elon instinctively lowered his voice, sensing the need for discretion. "They're controlling us," the boy muttered, his words barely above a whisper. "They're using the food, the chemicals, everything. It's all part of something bigger." Elon was silent for a long moment, absorbing the words. "Who is?" he finally asked, intrigued and now deeply concerned. "The people behind it all. The companies you don't see. The ones that control everything you eat, everything you drink. You think you're free, but you're not." The boy paused, his gaze flicking nervously to the street. "They've been doing it for years, and now they're ready to make their move." Elon could feel the weight of the boy's words pressing in. This was not some random street rant. There was a purpose in what he was saying, a sense of urgency that Elon couldn't ignore. "I need more than that," Elon said, his voice soft but steady. "I need to know who's doing this and what they're planning. Why haven't people found out about it before?" The boy hesitated again, his hands fidgeting as he played with the frayed edges of his jacket. He looked up at Elon, his expression unreadable. "Because they've made sure no one can. They control the news. They control the supply chains. They control everything." Elon felt a chill run down his spine. This was starting to sound like something out of a dystopian novel. But the boy's conviction, his desperation, made it impossible to dismiss as fantasy. "And you know this how?" Elon asked, trying to understand. The boy took a deep breath, his eyes distant for a moment before he finally spoke again. "Because my mom tried to stop them." Elon's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "My mom worked for one of the companies. She knew what they were doing. She tried to expose them. But they—" he swallowed hard, then shook his head. "They silenced her. I couldn't stop them." Elon watched the boy closely. There was a rawness in his voice, a pain that cut through the layers of bravado he had shown earlier. This wasn't just some kid trying to make a point. This was someone who had experienced something terrible, something that had shaken him to his core. "Do you know who's behind it?" Elon asked, his voice low. The boy nodded. "I do. But it's bigger than I can explain here. If you want to know more, you have to trust me." Elon hesitated. There was a part of him that wanted to turn away, to dismiss the boy's claims as the ravings of someone who had suffered too much. But another part, the part that had driven him to space, to change the future, to question everything, was telling him that this could be the most important thing he had ever heard. "I'm listening," Elon said quietly. The boy's gaze met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Elon sat across from the boy at a small cafe, the kind tucked away between two high-rise buildings in the heart of the city. It was quieter here, a contrast to the busy streets outside. The boy, whose name was Liam, sat with his arms folded tightly across his chest, eyes darting around every so often, as if he feared someone might be watching. He had ordered nothing, and Elon had insisted that he at least take a cup of water. They had found a secluded corner, away from the few patrons still lingering over their drinks. The air felt thick, as if the walls of the cafe were holding in secrets. Liam's presence was unusual in this setting, far removed from the streets where Elon had first met him. But here they were, sitting together, two very different people from entirely different worlds. Elon could see that Liam was deeply troubled, the weight of his past written in the lines of his face, despite his young age. The more Elon watched him, the more it became clear that this boy was no ordinary child. He carried the kind of wisdom and caution that only came from surviving experiences far beyond the average person's understanding. His eyes were alert, sharp, and full of a kind of sadness that made Elon wonder what had shaped him into the person he was today. "You said your mom worked for one of these companies," Elon said, trying to break the silence. He leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile trust that was starting to form between them. "What happened to her?" Liam's fingers tightened around the edge of the water glass. For a moment, he didn't respond. His gaze dropped to the table, his chest rising and falling slowly, almost as though the act of remembering was painful. Elon could feel the weight of his silence hanging in the air. "I don't talk about her much," Liam finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard." He paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "She wasn't just a worker at some company. She was a researcher, someone who found out what they were really doing. She wasn't like the others who just went along with it. She tried to warn people. She tried to fight back. Elon sat back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle starting to form, but still incomplete. What do you mean? What was she trying to fight? Liam's eyes flickered to the door, then back to Elon, as if to make sure no one was eavesdropping. His voice dropped even further. She discovered that the food companies, everyone you think you can trust, they were changing the way food worked. They were putting chemicals in it, things that could mess with your mind, things that could make people docile. And that was just the beginning. The more she learned, the more she realized they were planning to control everything. It wasn't just about food. It was about everything. They were working with big pharmaceutical companies, with government officials. They were making sure that no one could escape. Elon felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew about the power of the food industry, the supply chains, the marketing, the global reach. But this? Chemicals that could alter people's minds, that could manipulate entire populations? It was beyond anything he had imagined. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy theory, but the way Liam spoke, how earnest and pained he seemed, made it hard to dismiss. I didn't understand it at first, Liam continued, his eyes staring blankly ahead. I didn't know what she was talking about. I was just a kid, and all I knew was that my mom was always busy, always working late. She was always looking over her shoulder. She started getting scared. She said they were watching her. I didn't believe her, not until... Liam trailed off, his voice breaking as he looked down at his hands. Elon didn't push him to continue. He could see how much it hurt, and something told him that the details, painful as they were, would come in their own time. It was too late when I finally realized, Liam said, his voice quivering. They came for her. I didn't know where she went. She just disappeared. And then the next thing I knew, I was on the streets, alone. Elon felt a surge of empathy. This boy had been through unimaginable pain, a child who had lost everything, not just his home, but his family. His mother's fight against something he was only beginning to understand. And now, here he was, warning Elon about the very thing that had torn his life apart. Liam's gaze finally met Elon's, and for the first time, there was a faint flicker of trust in his eyes. They think they're invincible. They think no one can stop them. But my mom, she tried. She tried to tell the world. And now it's my turn. Elon sat back in his chair, absorbing the weight of Liam's words. The boy's determination was clear now. He wasn't just talking about some conspiracy. He was speaking from a place of real loss, of grief, and a burning desire for justice. Elon could see the fire in his eyes, the same kind of drive that had once fueled his own ventures, his desire to change the world. I want to help you, Elon said after a long pause. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet resolve in it. If what you're saying is true, if these companies are really doing this, then we need to stop them. We need to expose them. But we have to be careful. If they're as powerful as you say they are, we could be walking into something dangerous. Liam nodded solemnly. I know. I've been running from them for years. But now, I think you can help. You have the power, the resources. You can get the message out there. People will listen to you. Elon's mind raced. The implications of what Liam was saying were enormous. Could it really be true? Could food, something so fundamental to daily life, be used as a tool for control? He had always known that the world was full of corruption, but this felt different. It felt personal. I don't know how far this goes, Elon said quietly, but I promise you, I'll help you. We'll figure this out together. Liam's eyes softened. For the first time since Elon had met him, there was a hint of relief on his face. He wasn't alone anymore. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Elon couldn't stop thinking about Liam and the story he had shared, about the chemicals in food, the corporations behind it, and the forces that had silenced his mother. Elon had always considered himself a problem solver, someone who thrived under pressure, but this felt different. This wasn't just about technology, rockets, or cars. This was something darker, something more insidious. Liam had given Elon a name, a corporation he believed was at the center of the conspiracy, Vericorp. At first, Elon had dismissed it as just another business with too much power. Another tech giant trying to control everything. But the more he dug, the more he realized that there was something far more disturbing about them. Vericorp wasn't just a food company. They were involved in pharmaceuticals, agriculture, and even government contracts. They had their fingers in everything: supply chains, distribution, and even the research of new food technologies. But it wasn't just their reach that worried Elon. It was the secrecy. The level of protection they had around their operations was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was almost as if they were operating in the shadows, knowing they couldn't afford to be exposed. Liam's warning kept echoing in Elon's mind. They're controlling us. Every time Elon thought about it, it felt more real, more urgent. This wasn't just some crackpot theory. This was something that had been going on for years, something bigger than even he could comprehend. They met again a week later, this time in a more discreet location. A private office space that Elon owned, tucked away from the public eye. They decided it was safer to work in secret, away from prying eyes. The room was stark, furnished only with a few chairs, a desk, and a massive whiteboard that Elon used for his latest SpaceX designs. But today, the board was covered with a different kind of design: connections between companies, individuals, and strange occurrences. Liam sat in one of the chairs, nervously tapping his fingers on the edge of the desk. He'd been jumpy lately, always looking over his shoulder, scanning the room like he was afraid someone might burst through the door at any moment. Elon didn't blame him. If what they were up against was true, the people behind Vericorp weren't the kind to let things slide. Elon entered the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He threw a manila folder onto the desk, its contents spilling out. Research papers, news clippings, and legal documents, all leading back to Vericorp. "I've been doing some digging," Elon said, leaning against the desk, "and I don't like what I'm seeing. They're not just a food company. They've been involved in some sketchy pharmaceutical stuff too. New chemical additives, things that could alter the brain. There's something about their involvement in government contracts that's bothering me as well. I don't think we're dealing with just a corporation here." Liam's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "I told you, it's not just food. It's everything. They've been laying the groundwork for years." Elon exhaled slowly. "I know, but what I'm not seeing is how far this goes. Who's helping them? Who's in on this?" Liam shifted in his chair, unease radiating off him. "I don't know all the details. My mom didn't have all the answers. She was trying to get them out there, trying to warn people, but they silenced her before she could." Elon's brow furrowed. "And you didn't think to go public with this sooner?" "I did," Liam said, his voice tight with frustration. "But who would listen to a homeless kid? Besides, every time I try to get close, they've been on my tail. I've had to keep running. They know I know something, but they don't know I have you now." Elon paused, considering his next words carefully. "You realize what you're asking me to do, right? Going up against a corporation like this could destroy everything. My reputation, my companies, my career. And they're not just any corporation. They have influence, power. You saw what they did to your mother. This isn't going to be easy." Liam's eyes bore into him. "I know, but you're the only one who can help. You have the resources, the influence. You have the connections. They'll listen to you. You have to trust me on this. My mom tried to fight them, and they killed her for it. I can't let that happen again. I'm not asking for help. I'm asking you to help make things right." There was a long silence between them. Elon could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the magnitude of what he was about to undertake. His mind raced through the consequences. The risks were monumental, more than any of his previous ventures. Yet something in Liam's plea hit a deep chord within him. There was no denying the sincerity in his voice, the pain that he wore like a second skin. Elon had always believed in fighting for what was right. And this was a fight worth taking on. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice steady but filled with determination. "Okay, let's do it. But we do this carefully. We don't go in blind." Liam's expression softened, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you." Elon nodded, looking at the board in front of him, his mind already working. This was only the beginning. They spent the next few hours poring over everything Elon had gathered: company reports, documents linking Vericorp to underground research facilities and potential whistleblowers who had been too afraid to speak out. But the deeper they dug, the more it became clear. Whoever controlled Vericorp was untouchable. They had everything locked down. Media influence, legal protections, and political connections that reached farther than anyone could have imagined. Liam shifted in his seat. I can't tell you everything. There's more to this than just Vericorp. But I can tell you this, they're not the only ones. Elon turned to him sharply. What do you mean? Liam hesitated, as if weighing whether or not to continue. Finally, he spoke in a low, urgent tone. There are other companies, other people. They're all working together. It's not just one corporation. It's an entire network. Elon stared at him, his mind reeling. If what Liam was saying was true, they weren't just dealing with a single company. They were up against a conspiracy so vast it could change everything. The fight they were about to enter wasn't just against Vericorp. It was against an invisible, entrenched power that had been operating in the shadows for years. The true battle was just beginning. The world seemed to grow smaller with each passing day. Elon was accustomed to solving complex problems, whether it was launching rockets, building electric cars, or advancing artificial intelligence. But this was different. It was an entirely new world, one where the stakes weren't just technological, but deeply personal. And as each layer of the conspiracy unraveled, Elon realized that his mission was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about survival. Liam had made it clear that they couldn't trust anyone. Not the media, not the government, and certainly not the corporations. He spoke of shadow organizations, covert alliances, and hidden players in the global power structure that controlled far more than anyone realized. And the more Elon learned, the more he saw that Liam's warnings were not only valid, they were the foundation of something much larger than they had first imagined. After their last meeting, Elon had made the decision to go all in. This wasn't just a curiosity anymore. This was a fight for truth, for the future. He had set up a series of meetings with key insiders, former employees, whistleblowers, anyone who had information that could shed light on what was happening behind closed doors. He wasn't going to rely solely on Liam's fragmented pieces of the puzzle. It was time to pull in all the resources he had at his disposal. The first step was locating someone who had worked for Vericorp directly, someone who could get them inside information. The contact he had was a former employee, a woman named Sarah, who had once been a lead scientist in one of their top-secret research labs. She had left the company under mysterious circumstances after she'd begun questioning the ethics of their experiments. Elon had managed to track her down, and after a few discreet exchanges, they arranged to meet. The meeting took place in a small, unassuming cafe just outside the city. It was the kind of place where people blended in, where no one paid attention to who you were or what you were doing. A perfect setting for a covert meeting. Elon and Liam arrived separately, avoiding any obvious association. They had no idea how far Vericorp's reach extended, and they weren't taking any chances. The only thing that mattered now was the information. Sarah was waiting when they arrived, sitting at a corner table with a large mug of coffee. She was in her early 40s, with a tired, worn look about her. Her eyes were sharp, but there was a sadness there, as if she had seen too much to ever go back to the way things were. Elon took a seat across from her, his gaze fixed on her face. There was an unease about her, but also a quiet resolve. She knew the risks. She wouldn't have agreed to meet if she hadn't. Sarah, Elon said quietly, extending his hand, thank you for meeting with us. She hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand, her grip firm but guarded. I don't have much time, she said, her voice low, almost as though someone might be listening. And I don't know how much you already know, but I'm risking a lot just by being here. We're here to help, Elon assured her. We just need the truth. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes flicking to Liam, who was sitting quietly beside Elon. He seemed to be waiting for something, his expression unreadable. I left Vericorp because I couldn't be a part of it anymore, Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly. I was a scientist, one of the lead researchers on food chemistry. We were working on things that were supposed to make food more efficient, more sustainable. But what they didn't tell us was what we were really doing. They weren't just trying to make food better. They were trying to control it. They had us experimenting with chemicals that altered the brain, things that could make people more compliant, more easily controlled. Elon's heart raced as he leaned forward, his mind processing the implications of what she was saying. What kind of chemicals? What were they trying to achieve? Sarah paused, her eyes darting nervously to the door before speaking again. The chemicals were designed to affect the way people think. They would make them more docile, less likely to question what was happening around them. It was part of a larger agenda, something that started with food, but quickly expanded into pharmaceuticals, even tech. They wanted to create a world where people would just accept things, where they wouldn't question authority, where they wouldn't question anything at all. Liam's face hardened as he listened, his fists clenched on the table. So my mom was right, he muttered under his breath. They've been doing this for years. Sarah nodded solemnly. Yes, your mother was one of the few who started asking the right questions. She saw what they were doing, and she tried to stop it. But they were too powerful. By the time she started making noise, it was too late. They silenced her. But now the truth is starting to get out. People are waking up. Elon felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. This was no longer just about some hidden conspiracy. This was about a global network of control, a system so entrenched that it could take years, maybe even decades, to tear down. He had fought battles before, but this was unlike anything he had ever faced. How deep does it go? Elon asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of urgency in his chest. Who's involved? How far does this conspiracy reach? Sarah hesitated, looking around once more, then leaned in closer. It's not just VeraCorp. There are other companies, other players. They all work together. Some are pharmaceutical giants, others are tech companies. They've been slowly tightening their grip on society. Food, medicine, technology, it's all connected. And the scariest part? They've infiltrated the government. They've made sure that no one will be able to stop them. At least, not without a fight. Elon sat back, absorbing the gravity of her words. This was the fight of a lifetime. But it was also a fight he couldn't back down from. For Liam, for the people who had been unknowingly subjected to this manipulation, and for his own belief that the world needed to be a better place. What's the next step? Elon asked, his voice low. We need to go public, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. We need to expose them, but we can't do it alone. You have the resources. You have the power to make them listen, but it's going to take more than just information. It's going to take action. Elon nodded, a sense of purpose solidifying in his chest. We'll do it. We'll take them down. The night after their meeting with Sarah, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The weight of the information Sarah had shared kept replaying in his mind. It wasn't just about food and chemicals anymore. It was about the future of society itself. They were fighting against an unseen enemy that had embedded itself in every aspect of life. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a silent war, one that had been waged for years without anyone truly understanding its scope. Liam, too, seemed troubled. He had spent most of the evening pacing around the office, his thoughts clearly consumed by the revelations. The walls of the room seemed to close in on him as he processed what Sarah had revealed, and Elon could see the internal battle that raged within him. His mother's fight had been a lonely one, but now he wasn't alone. Now, there was someone who believed him, someone who was ready to fight alongside him. But even with Elon's resources, even with the knowledge they had gathered, they both knew the stakes were higher than they could have imagined. To take down VeraCorp and the network behind it would require more than just exposure. They would have to tear down the entire system, piece by piece, and make sure the world understood the truth. The next few days were spent in feverish preparation. Elon had gathered a small team of trusted people, his most loyal employees from Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink. He couldn't afford to trust too many. This operation needed to remain under the radar, out of reach of the ever-watchful eyes of VeraCorp and their allies. Every step had to be calculated. But even with all the preparations, there was still one constant fear that lingered in Elon's mind. Would it be enough? Liam remained by his side, working tirelessly to help coordinate the plan. The boy had become more than just an ally. He had become an essential part of this mission. His anger, his grief, and his drive to see justice done pushed them both forward. Elon had never been a man driven by vengeance, but Liam's cause had become his own. They weren't just fighting for the truth. They were fighting for people who had been manipulated, controlled, and silenced. And that was a fight worth risking everything for. It was a Thursday evening when the call came. Elon was at home, staring at the stack of encrypted documents on his desk. He had been reviewing the final pieces of their plan when his phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. He glanced at the screen. "Sarah, they know. They're coming for us. I'm sorry." His heart dropped into his stomach. Before he could process the message, a second text arrived. "Sarah, get out. Now." Elon's pulse quickened. The reality had hit. Vericorp wasn't just watching them anymore. They were coming for them. Every piece of information they had gathered, every step they had taken, had led them here. They were about to be exposed, and there was no telling what lengths Vericorp would go to in order to protect their empire. He quickly grabbed his phone and dialed Liam's number. The line rang once, twice, then answered. "Liam," Elon said urgently. "It's happening. They know." There was a moment of silence before Liam's voice came through, strained but calm. "I know. I've been watching the news. They've started to move." Elon ran a hand through his hair, the weight of it all sinking in. "What do we do now?" Liam's voice was unwavering. "We fight. We don't back down. We do what we planned. We go public. We make sure everyone knows the truth, no matter what." Elon's hand tightened around the phone. "But we don't even know who's behind this. We're walking into a storm. We've been walking into this storm since the moment we started," Liam replied, his tone resolute. "The only difference now is we're not alone. We're not afraid anymore." Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the truth in Liam's words. It had been a fight since the beginning, a fight for survival, but it was also a fight for something far greater than himself. This wasn't just about him, or even Liam. It was about all of them. The people who had unknowingly been victims of this vast manipulation. The ones who didn't even know they were being controlled. They had to fight. They had to win. "I'm going to meet you," Elon said, determination in his voice. "We're doing this. Together." The streets were empty when Elon and Liam left the safety of the office. The city felt different, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to break. They drove in silence, the hum of the electric car echoing through the streets, but neither of them spoke. The weight of their decision hung heavy between them. As they approached the meeting point, an old warehouse on the edge of town, Elon felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. The kind he had felt before space launches, before major presentations. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't about innovation or success. It was about survival. It was about justice. They arrived at the warehouse, and Elon's team was already there, preparing the equipment they would need to go public. The facility had been outfitted with high-tech cameras and servers, everything they would need to broadcast the truth to the world. This was their moment. They had everything they needed to expose Vericorp's crimes, everything but the final piece. Liam stepped forward, standing next to Elon, and for the first time, the boy's usual nervousness was gone. His eyes were focused, resolute, and there was no doubt in his voice when he spoke. "This is it," he said. "This is what my mom fought for. This is what we've all been waiting for. Now it's our turn." Elon nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. It was time. They had gathered the evidence. They had the proof. The world was about to know what was really happening behind the closed doors of Vericorp, and there was no turning back now. As the countdown to the broadcast began, Elon felt the weight of everything on his shoulders. This was their moment. This was their fight. And the world would never be the same again. The room hummed with tension as Elon and Liam stood at the heart of the warehouse. Around them, Elon's team worked with surgical precision, setting up cameras, connecting servers, and checking every system to ensure that nothing went wrong. This moment, years in the making, was almost upon them. There was no turning back now. Elon could feel the weight of what they were about to do pressing on him, but at the same time, there was a flicker of hope. They had prepared for this moment for weeks, gathering evidence, corroborating stories, and plotting their move against a corporation so vast it seemed untouchable. The time to act was now. They couldn't wait any longer. Liam stood by his side, his jaw set, eyes full of resolve. There was no fear in his face anymore, just an unwavering determination. Elon had seen that same look in his own reflection during moments of intense pressure. He knew exactly what it meant. It meant that whatever the outcome, they were going to give everything they had to expose the truth. "You ready?" Elon asked, his voice steady despite the nervous energy that buzzed within him. Liam nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Elon looked at his team, nodding to each member. "We're doing this. No matter what happens, we stick to the plan." The countdown had already started. As the final seconds ticked down, Elon could feel his heart beating in his chest. The footage they were about to broadcast would rock the world. It wasn't just about unveiling the dark secrets of VeraCorp. It was about unveiling the corruption that had been festering in society for years, about showing the people how deeply they had been manipulated. It was a warning, a call to arms. The screen in front of them blinked, signaling that the live broadcast was about to begin. Elon's breath caught in his throat as he gave one last glance at Liam. The boy had become more than just a partner in this fight. He had become the symbol of resistance, of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The countdown reached 0, a click, and the screen lit up. The footage began with a montage, a collection of documents, internal emails, and video clips, all documenting the inner workings of VeraCorp. The evidence was damning. Research papers on chemical additives designed to alter human behavior, financial records linking the corporation to pharmaceutical and tech industries, and shocking undercover footage showing the lengths they had gone to silence whistleblowers and suppress public knowledge. Sarah's voice could be heard in the background, narrating what had happened behind closed doors. She spoke with the raw honesty of someone who had lived through the horrors of the corporation, someone who had risked everything to uncover the truth. "They want to control everything," Sarah's voice echoed through the warehouse, amplified by the speakers. "The food we eat, the medicine we take, even the thoughts we have. They've been doing it for years, and now they have more power than any of us can imagine. But we can't let them win. We can't let them control us." Elon felt a rush of pride for Sarah. Her words were finally out there, reaching millions of people. But even as the video played, Elon knew it wasn't enough. Exposing the truth was only the first step. The real battle was ahead. People needed to rise up. They needed to understand the magnitude of what had been happening under their noses for so long. As the video concluded, a message appeared on the screen. "This is just the beginning. The truth will not be silenced." The screen went black, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the phone rang. Elon's eyes locked onto the number on the screen, an encrypted line, only used for emergencies. He picked up the call, his pulse quickening. "Elon," came the voice on the other end. It was Sarah. "It's happening. They're scrambling. Did they see the broadcast?" Elon asked, his voice tense. "Not yet, but they're aware of what we're doing. They'll try to shut us down, but we've prepared for this. We've set up a network of support. It's bigger than just you now." Elon's heart skipped. "Support? Who?" "We've been reaching out to other whistleblowers, to activists, to anyone who's been fighting back. They'll help spread the message. The world will know the truth now, and we can't let them silence us. We're not alone." A wave of relief washed over Elon. "This is it then. The fight has begun." Back at the warehouse, the team was already mobilizing, working to protect their data and ensure the broadcast reached its full potential. Elon and Liam exchanged a look, one of silent understanding. The pieces were falling into place. The truth was out there, and it was only a matter of time before the world reacted. The first reports of the broadcast started pouring in. News outlets around the world picked up the story, and social media exploded with reactions: shock, outrage, and disbelief. People were finally waking up to what had been happening under their noses for years. But VeraCorp wasn't going to let this go without a fight. Almost immediately, there were reports of attempts to suppress the information, to discredit the evidence, and to silence those who had spoken out. Corporate PR teams were working overtime, trying to spin the story in their favor. But for once, it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. The next few days were a blur. Elon and Liam worked tirelessly, coordinating with the media, providing additional evidence, and making sure their message reached every corner of the globe. They knew they had to act quickly before VeraCorp and their allies could regain control of the narrative. But as the truth continued to spread, something unexpected happened. People began to rise up. Protests erupted in major cities. People from all walks of life, activists, workers, ordinary citizens, started demanding accountability from VeraCorp. It was clear that the fight had only just begun, but for the first time, there was hope. The world had begun to wake up. As the dust began to settle, Elon and Liam stood together outside the warehouse, watching as the news reports continued to pour in. The weight of what they had done began to sink in. They had exposed the truth, yes, but now they had to see it through. The real work was only beginning. "We did it," Liam said quietly, his voice almost in awe. Elon nodded, his gaze steady but thoughtful. "We did. But this is just the beginning, Liam. The fight isn't over. We've opened the door, but now we have to make sure it stays open. We have to hold them accountable." Liam looked up at him, a small smile breaking through. "And we will." For the first time, Elon believed him. The days following the broadcast felt like a whirlwind. The world had been set on fire. Elon and Liam watched in real time as the backlash began to unfold. VeraCorp pulling out all the stops to regain control of the narrative, media outlets scrambling to adjust their coverage, and politicians, many of whom had secretly been involved, quickly distancing themselves from the scandal. But one thing was clear. They couldn't put the truth back in the bottle. As much as Elon wanted to savor the success of finally pulling the curtain back on VeraCorp's corrupt empire, the tension in the air told him this fight was far from over. There was a storm coming, and though they'd won this first battle, it was only a matter of time before VeraCorp came for them, in ways they couldn't anticipate. That night, as the chaos spread across social media, Elon couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his office, staring out over the city lights, the weight of what they had started pressing down on him. Liam had taken a break, going to check in with Sarah and the others who were helping distribute the message globally. Elon was grateful for the support. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. He reached for his phone and checked the news again. There were reports of people being silenced. Whistleblowers who had come forward with similar information were suddenly disappearing. A few activists had been arrested. And, perhaps most chilling of all, there were rumors that some of his own people had been approached by VeraCorp's agents, asking them to keep quiet. Elon gritted his teeth. It wasn't just about the fight for truth anymore. It was about survival. They had thrown a stone into the water, and now the ripples were reaching further than they had imagined. The powers that be weren't going to let this go quietly. VeraCorp had deep ties, political, economic, and criminal, that could crush them without a second thought. He picked up the phone and dialed Liam's number. It rang twice before Liam picked up. "Elon, is everything okay?" Liam asked, his voice distant, but concerned. "I don't think so," Elon replied, his voice tense. "Things are escalating faster than I thought. Have you heard about the arrests? The disappearances?" Liam sighed. "Yeah, it's bad, Elon. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but they're pulling out all the stops. They're scared. And that means they're dangerous." "Right," Elon agreed. "We need to figure out how to stay ahead of this. If they're going after people, they'll come for us next. I need you to be careful. We all need to be careful." Liam's silence on the other end was heavy. "We're in this together, Elon. I'm not backing down. We'll stay one step ahead of them." Elon appreciated the boy's resolve, but he couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about protecting everyone who had come forward, everyone who had trusted them. The fight wasn't just against VeraCorp. It was against the system they had built, a system that was so entrenched it could crush anyone in its path. The next morning, they gathered at the warehouse again. The atmosphere was different now. There was no longer the thrill of the reveal, the excitement of being the ones to expose a massive secret. Now, it was all about strategy and survival. Elon had brought in more people. Experts, analysts, former insiders, anyone who could help them stay one step ahead. He even reached out to some of his most trusted allies, people who could help protect their operation. It was time to go on the offensive. The next move had to be calculated, precise, and swift. "We need to disrupt their operations," Elon said, addressing the group. We've exposed them, but they're not going to fold that easily. We need to hit them where it hurts, financially, politically, and in the public eye. The world is watching, and they're going to do everything they can to discredit us, so we need to stay ahead of them. Liam stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. We've got a lot of people rooting for us, but we need to make sure we protect them. Everyone who's spoken out, every whistleblower. They're all in danger. We can't afford to let them be silenced. Elon nodded, the reality of the situation settling over him like a heavy cloak. They were fighting an unseen enemy, an enemy with resources and influence that stretched far beyond their reach. But for the first time, they weren't alone in the fight. They had the people behind them. The world was watching, and that was their advantage. People were waking up to the truth, and they couldn't afford to let that momentum die out. We need to focus on getting the truth into the hands of as many people as possible, Elon continued. We need to use every platform we have. We'll crowdsource the data, leak more documents, connect with influencers who have the reach to get this out there. But most importantly, we need to protect those who are at the heart of this. For the next few days, it was a blur of phone calls, meetings, and covert operations. Elon's team worked around the clock, creating safe houses for whistleblowers, providing them with secure channels to communicate, and fortifying their digital presence to withstand the onslaught of cyber attacks that Vericorp was launching against them. But even as they worked tirelessly, the tension was palpable. They were no longer just fighting a corrupt corporation. They were fighting for their lives. Elon knew that the deeper they dug, the more dangerous things would become. Vericorp had vast resources, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threat to their empire. One evening, as Elon sat at his desk, reviewing a new batch of leaked documents, he received a call from one of his most trusted insiders. The man's voice was panicked. "Elon, it's happening. They found us." Elon's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "They found our safe houses. They're coming after us." The words hit like a punch to the gut. The fear in the man's voice was enough to make Elon's blood run cold. "How many?" "Too many. We can't hold them off for long." Elon's mind raced. He had known this moment might come, but he hadn't expected it so soon. This was no longer just about gathering information or exposing the truth. It was about survival, about protecting those who had put everything on the line to help them. "Elon, you need to get out of there," the insider urged. "They know about the operation. They'll come for you, too. You have to move now." Elon's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. "I'm on my way." He hung up the phone and looked at Liam, who was sitting across from him, deep in thought. Elon's voice was firm as he spoke. "It's time. We need to move fast." Liam stood up, determination in his eyes. "We've come this far. We're not going to stop now." As Elon and Liam raced to relocate their team and protect the whistleblowers, they knew that the coming days would be the hardest yet. They had exposed the truth, but now they had to survive it. The stakes had never been higher, and every step forward felt like stepping deeper into enemy territory. The storm had only just begun, but with each passing moment, the fire of resistance burned brighter, and Elon and Liam knew one thing for sure. They were ready to face whatever came next. The air was thick with the sounds of city traffic, the distant hum of machinery, and the low buzz of a storm building on the horizon. Elon and Liam stood side by side in a dimly lit room at their new temporary safe house. A far cry from the sleek office buildings and palatial estates that Elon was used to. This place was humble, hidden away from the world outside. But inside, the weight of the mission was heavier than ever. "Things are moving faster than I thought," Elon said, his voice laced with tension. He was pacing, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Vericorp is hitting us harder than we anticipated." Liam, standing next to him, nodded grimly. The boy had matured in the past few weeks, his once youthful face now marked by the seriousness of someone who had seen too much. "We knew this was coming. We just didn't expect it to happen so quickly." Elon's mind was racing. It was one thing to uncover the secrets of a corrupt empire. It was another to survive its retaliation. They had exposed Vericorp's darkest truths to the world, and now the corporation's efforts to maintain control were becoming more aggressive by the day. But this was no longer just about corporate power and money. This was personal. VeraCorp had taken everything from Liam, his home, his family, his life, and now they were coming after Elon and everyone else involved in the fight for justice. "We can't stay here for long," Elon said, rubbing a hand over his face. "They'll trace us. They've already started to move against our allies." "We'll keep moving," Liam said, determination hardening his voice. "We can't let them win. We're going to fight back, Elon. We have to." Elon stopped pacing and turned to look at Liam, his eyes filled with a new kind of resolve. "You're right. We can't back down now, but we need to plan our next move carefully. VeraCorp has the power to destroy us, but if we strike at the right moment, we can take them down." It was time to start thinking bigger. They had gathered enough evidence to make a substantial case against VeraCorp, but now it was time to turn the tide in their favor. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and execution. The small, tightly knit team of activists, insiders, and media allies that Elon had gathered was working overtime to stay one step ahead of VeraCorp's every move. They were constantly shifting locations, securing communications, and spreading the message. But despite their best efforts, the looming threat of VeraCorp's wrath was never far away. Late one night, Elon met with Sarah in an undisclosed location. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated their faces as they pored over files, data, and video footage. Sarah had become a key figure in this fight, someone whose bravery and knowledge had proven indispensable. She had connections all over the world: activists, journalists, hackers, and others who were just as committed to the cause as they were. Together, they had built a network that was almost impossible to infiltrate. "It's working," Sarah said, her fingers tapping rapidly over the keyboard. "The leaks are getting out faster than they can contain them. But we need something big, something that can't be ignored." Elon leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Something like what?" Sarah looked up at him, her gaze intense. "VeraCorp's financial records. They've been moving millions of dollars in secret transactions, funneling funds into black market operations, using shell companies to hide their tracks. If we can get our hands on those files and make them public, it could bring the entire corporation to its knees." Elon's mind was already spinning, envisioning the fallout. If they exposed VeraCorp's financial network, it could not only expose their corruption but also send shockwaves through the entire corporate world. The ripple effects would be massive, but it would also be a huge risk. One wrong move, and they could lose everything. "It's risky," Elon said, running a hand through his hair. "But it's our best shot. We'll do it." Sarah nodded. "We'll need to move quickly. I'll contact our people inside, but we have to be prepared for them to come after us the moment we release it." Elon stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the night. The weight of the decision hung heavily in the air, but he knew, deep down, that there was no turning back now. They had come this far. It was time to push all their chips in. "We go for it," Elon said, his voice firm. "But we move fast. We hit them with everything we've got." The operation was set into motion with the precision of a military strike. Sarah's network of contacts worked around the clock to infiltrate VeraCorp's financial systems. Meanwhile, Elon and Liam focused on preparing the public for what was about to come. They knew they had to build anticipation, create a sense of urgency, and prepare the world for the truth that was about to shatter everything. But as they were preparing for the final release, they received a chilling phone call. "It's happening," the voice on the other end said. "They know what you're planning." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "How?" "They've got spies everywhere. They found the leak. It's only a matter of time before they trace it back to you. You need to move now." The fear in the voice of the caller was unmistakable. Elon's mind raced as he realized what this meant. The clock was ticking. VeraCorp wasn't just going to sit idly by and let them release the truth. They would stop at nothing to prevent it. "We don't have much time," Elon said, his voice low. "Make sure the data is secured and ready. We'll do it tonight." The night was dark, the streets empty as Elon and Liam met with Sarah and the others at a secure location. The tension was palpable, but there was also a sense of resolve in the air. They had done everything they could to protect themselves, to prepare for this moment. Now it was time to act. Elon stared at the screen in front of him, watching as the final files were uploaded and the countdown began. He had never felt a sense of purpose as strong as this before. This wasn't just about bringing down Vericorp. It was about reclaiming the power that had been stolen from people like Liam, people who had lost everything to the greed of a few. The countdown hit 0. The files were released. For a moment, there was silence. Then the world exploded. News outlets across the globe began to report on the financial scandal surrounding Vericorp. The transactions were detailed. Millions of dollars funneled into illicit operations, secret deals with corrupt governments, and the use of unethical practices to manipulate markets. It was clear that this was the final blow to Vericorp's empire. The corporation couldn't recover from this. Elon and Liam watched as the news spread like wildfire, knowing that the battle had just taken on a new level of intensity. Vericorp would stop at nothing to silence them. But for now, the truth was out. The world had seen it, and there was no going back. The moment the files went public, a wave of shock and outrage flooded the media. Elon and Liam watched the storm unfold in real time, the massive implications of their actions taking hold of the global stage. Headlines flashed across screens as the financial records they'd uncovered painted a devastating picture of Vericorp's corruption, millions laundered through illegal channels, secretive deals with hostile governments, and a web of deceit that reached the highest echelons of power. The world was now aware of the corporation's dark underbelly, and it was shaking the very foundations of the corporate world. But beneath the surface of victory, a gnawing fear started to settle in Elon's chest. They had made a massive leap forward, but they had also exposed themselves completely. Vericorp was a behemoth, and no amount of evidence could protect them from its ruthless tactics. Elon paced the small room of their safe house, his mind spinning. He'd always been good at navigating the complexities of business, technology, and strategy. But this was different. He wasn't just fighting for profits or market share. He was fighting for survival. The truth was out, and now the question wasn't whether it would change the world. It was whether they could stay alive long enough to see that change. The phone on the table buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. Elon grabbed it quickly, seeing that it was from Liam. "Elon, you need to see this." Liam's voice crackled through the line. There was urgency in his tone. "What's going on?" Elon asked, a pit forming in his stomach. "It's Sarah. She's gone." Elon's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, gone?" Liam's voice trembled. "She's disappeared. We haven't been able to reach her since the files went live. We think Vericorp's agents may have gotten to her." A lump formed in Elon's throat. Sarah had been with them from the beginning, and her loyalty had never wavered. She had been more than just an ally. She had been a friend. And now, just when they were on the cusp of victory, they were losing her. "I'll get on it," Elon said, his voice hardening. "We need to find her. Now." The next few hours were a blur of frantic phone calls, messages, and tactical moves. Elon and Liam reached out to every contact they had, trying to track Sarah's whereabouts. But as time ticked by, it became clear that they were facing an uphill battle. Vericorp's reach was far and wide. They had likely intercepted Sarah long before she had the chance to warn them. As the night wore on, Elon found himself sitting in front of his laptop, staring at the live feeds of news coverage. He couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah. They had come so far, and now it felt like everything was starting to unravel. How could they have been so close to exposing Vericorp's entire operation, only for it to all fall apart in an instant? "Are we really going to let them win, Elon?" Liam's voice broke through his thoughts, and Elon turned to see the boy standing in the doorway, eyes filled with frustration. "Of course not," Elon said, his tone fierce. "But this is bigger than any of us. Vericorp has resources that we can't even begin to imagine. We need to be smarter than they are. We need to find a way to use this moment of chaos, to our advantage." Liam walked into the room, crossing the floor to stand beside Elon. "We've exposed them. People are waking up. They can't put the truth back in the box now. And Sarah, she knew the risks. We all did. But that doesn't mean we stop now." Elon nodded, feeling the weight of Liam's words. The boy was right. They couldn't stop now, not after everything they had sacrificed. Sarah wouldn't want them to give up. He stood up, his resolve hardening. "You're right. We're not giving up. Vericorp may have taken Sarah, but they haven't won yet." They set to work once again, gathering intel, reaching out to trusted sources, and planning their next move. It wasn't just about the fight against VeraCorp anymore. It was about honoring Sarah's sacrifice. They had to finish what they started, no matter what it cost them. Hours later, Elon and Liam received a tip that sent a chill down their spines. A trusted informant had discovered that Sarah had been taken to a hidden VeraCorp facility located deep within the mountains. It was a black site, a place where the corporation sent people who knew too much and posed a threat to its empire. And once they were sent there, no one ever came back. Elon stood up, his fists clenched in anger. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. If they were going to save Sarah and keep their fight alive, they had to act now. "We go in tonight," Elon said, his voice cold and determined. "We're not leaving without her." Liam looked at him, eyes wide. "Elon, this place, it's not going to be easy. We don't even know what kind of security they have there. If we're going to do this, we need to be careful." "I don't care how difficult it is," Elon replied, his voice unwavering. "We're going. We're not leaving anyone behind. Not now. Not ever." The journey to the facility was a blur. The hours seemed to stretch on forever as they made their way into the mountains, navigating treacherous terrain and evading detection. Every moment felt like they were walking on a knife's edge. They had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just them, the people who had come together to fight for something bigger than themselves. When they finally reached the facility, it was everything they had feared. Towering walls, armed guards, high-tech surveillance systems. This wasn't just a corporate stronghold, it was a fortress. But Elon and Liam were undeterred. They had come this far, and they weren't going to let fear stop them now. With the help of their network, they had developed a plan. It was risky, but it was their only shot. As they infiltrated the facility, the adrenaline coursing through their veins, they encountered obstacles at every turn. They dodged cameras, snuck past guards, and hacked into security systems. It felt like a race against time, and every moment was fraught with danger. Finally, they reached the room where Sarah was being held. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed open the door. And there she was, pale, disheveled, but alive. "Sarah." Liam rushed to her side, relief flooding his face. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. She was weak, but there was a flicker of recognition in her gaze. "You found me," she whispered. "We're getting you out of here," Elon said, his voice steady. "We're finishing this." As they made their escape, Elon felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. The cost of this fight had been greater than he had imagined. So many had been hurt along the way. But in this moment, as they broke free from VeraCorp's clutches, he realized something profound. The fight for truth was never going to be easy, but it was always worth it. As they made their way back to safety, the weight of the battle they had won, and the battles still to come, settled heavily on Elon's shoulders. They were not finished, not by a long shot, but the fire of resistance burned brighter than ever before. And for the first time in a long while, Elon felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The air was thin and cold as they made their way down the jagged mountain path, the weight of their success and the aftermath of their harrowing rescue weighing heavily on them. The moment Sarah had rejoined them, it had felt like a victory, but Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were still far from being free. The fight was far from over. They had successfully infiltrated one of VeraCorp's most secure facilities, but the cost was high. Every move had been calculated. Every second of their escape had been a gamble. Yet, as Sarah rested against Liam, her face pale but her eyes sharp with determination, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. They had brought her back, but now they had to plan for what came next. "How are you holding up?" Elon asked Sarah softly as they walked in silence. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "I've been through worse, but this is different. You're all in this with me now." Liam, ever the quiet observer, added, "We're not stopping now. Not until we finish what we started." They had come too far to turn back, and Elon knew they couldn't stop just because they had saved one person. They had exposed VeraCorp, yes, but it was only a matter of time before the corporation came after them with everything they had. They needed a strategy, a foolproof plan. "Listen," Elon said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his bones. "We've hit them hard, but they'll retaliate. It's only a matter of time before they come after us again, and they'll be coming for everyone involved. We need to get ahead of them. We need to hit them where it hurts the most." Liam, who had been unusually quiet since Sarah's rescue, spoke up. "Where's that?" Elon turned to face him, meeting his gaze with a fire in his eyes. "We need to take down their influence. We need to expose their leadership. Everyone at the top needs to be brought into the light." Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already working through the logistics of their next move. "But we can't just release everything at once. Vericorp has too many resources. We have to be smart about this. Strategic?" "You're right," Elon agreed. "We need to find the people who are at the top of this whole operation, the ones who've been pulling the strings. If we can bring them down, we can take away Vericorp's power." The plan began to take shape slowly, like a puzzle being pieced together. Each step had to be precise. One wrong move, and they risked exposing themselves, giving Vericorp the chance to eliminate them completely. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly, drawing up a new set of strategies. They moved locations constantly, staying one step ahead of their enemies. Information was their weapon, and they needed to be careful about who they trusted. The risk of betrayal was higher than ever. While Elon and Liam continued to gather intel, Sarah took on the role of organizing their new network of allies. She reached out to journalists, activists, and hackers who were as dedicated as they were to taking down the corporate giant. The underground resistance was growing, and with every new piece of information they uncovered, they became stronger. Elon watched it all unfold. The quiet urgency in Sarah's voice as she briefed their team. The way Liam moved with precision, always one step ahead. They were both more than just assets now, they were family. And that made the stakes higher, much higher. But as the days passed and they drew closer to executing their final move, Elon couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. He thought back to the first time he had met Liam, the boy who had been left with nothing, abandoned by the system, with only his sharp mind and instincts to guide him. Elon had seen something in him then, a spark, and it was that spark that had led them here. And Sarah, the woman who had been their anchor through it all. It was hard to think of how much they owed her. She had become their strategist, their voice of reason. Without her, they would have never made it this far. It was late one evening when Elon gathered everyone together for what they knew would be their final briefing before executing their plan. The room was dimly lit, shadows flickering from the glow of the laptops scattered across the table. Sarah was perched on one side, her eyes scanning the screens in front of her. Liam was pacing, his face tense. "We're doing this," Elon said, standing at the head of the table. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "This is our chance to take them down for good." Everyone was silent, their eyes fixed on him. "I know we've come a long way, but we have to remember that this isn't just about us anymore. It's about the people we're fighting for, the ones who can't fight for themselves. We're doing this for them." Liam looked up, his eyes serious. "But we need to be prepared. Vericorp won't go down without a fight. They have connections everywhere, and they'll do anything to stop us." Sarah spoke next, her voice calm but resolute. "We've prepared for this. We know where they'll strike first. We've got one chance to expose their leadership and take them out. If we miss this opportunity—" Elon cut her off. "We won't miss it." He felt the familiar sense of determination rising within him. There was no more room for hesitation. The plan had to succeed. The only way they were going to take down the corporation once and for all was to strike with everything they had. "We go public tomorrow," Elon continued, making his decision final. "We'll release the final piece of evidence, the last of the files we've been holding back, the ones that show who's behind all of this. We go big. We bring them all down at once." The silence in the room was palpable, the tension thick in the air. Liam nodded slowly. "Then we do it." The meeting ended soon after, each person retreating to their own corner of the hideout, final preparations in the making. As Elon sat back, staring at the map of the facility they would target, he reflected on how far they had come. They had already risked so much, but the hardest part, the most dangerous part, was still ahead of them. The next morning, the world was rocked by the final release. The evidence came crashing into newsrooms, social media feeds, and private inboxes all over the world. The documents showed the true masterminds behind VeraCorp, names that had been hidden for years, people who were untouchable in the eyes of the public. These were the corporate titans, the ones who had been pulling the strings all along, orchestrating schemes that spanned countries and industries. For a moment, Elon, Liam, and Sarah watched the world shift before their eyes. It was as if the entire world was waking up to a new reality. They had done it, but the moment was short-lived. The battle was far from over. VeraCorp wasn't going down without one last fight. And now that they had exposed the corporation's leaders, there would be no turning back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few hours felt like a blur to Elon. The world had already begun to shift around them, yet it seemed everything was still suspended in a state of tense anticipation. They had pulled the trigger, exposed the ultimate corruption, but they were also standing on the precipice of everything they had worked for. The truth was out. Now they had to survive the storm that would come with it. Elon sat by a flickering screen, watching as the world reacted. News outlets across the globe were in chaos. Everyone was scrambling to verify the documents they had leaked, analyzing the consequences. Governments were shaking, corporate giants were reeling, and people everywhere were beginning to ask the most dangerous question. Who's really in charge here? Sarah sat beside him, her eyes locked on the screen. For the first time in what felt like forever, she looked uncertain. Elon could see the cracks in her facade. The pressure was mounting. Liam, ever the strategist, paced the room restlessly. We've done the hard part. Now we wait for them to make their move. VeraCorp won't take this lying down, Sarah said, her voice steely. We've put a target on our backs, and they'll be coming for us sooner rather than later. I know, Elon replied, his voice low, but this is bigger than just us now. This is the moment we've been waiting for. We can't let them win. The room fell silent as each of them considered the magnitude of what they had set in motion. Their victory had set off a chain reaction. The corporate world was crumbling, and with it, the foundations of global power were shaking. But as much as Elon wanted to believe in the righteousness of their cause, he knew the real danger was just beginning. VeraCorp wouldn't go down without one final fight, one that would test them all in ways they hadn't imagined. The phone rang just after midnight, its shrill tone cutting through the stillness. Elon's heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the number flashing on the screen. It was an encrypted call from their ally, Max, the hacker who had been instrumental in bringing down VeraCorp's financial network. Max? Elon answered quickly. Elon. Max's voice was tight with urgency. You need to listen to me. They know it was you. You've already been flagged. I don't know how long you have before they come for you. Elon felt a chill settle in his chest. What do you mean? I thought we were careful with the leaks. You were, Max replied. But VeraCorp is smarter than you think. They've already traced the leak back to your location. They're sending an extraction team. You need to move now. The blood drained from Elon's face as the words sank in. How long do we have? Maybe hours. Maybe less, Max answered grimly. Get out of there. I'll keep you updated, but you need to get to a safe house fast. Don't trust anyone. The line went dead. Elon sat back, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He turned to Sarah and Liam, who were already watching him, waiting for the news. We've been compromised, Elon said, his voice low. VeraCorp's coming for us. We don't have much time. Liam's eyes hardened with resolve. Then we leave. Now. Sarah stood, her movements sharp and purposeful. Get the gear. We need to move quickly. They sprang into action, gathering what little they could in the span of mere minutes. Elon's mind raced as he helped pack up the essentials. Their work wasn't over. They couldn't afford to get caught now, not when they were so close to seeing VeraCorp fall. But there was no denying it. They were in danger. Big danger. As they slipped out of their hideout into the early morning darkness, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that everything they had worked for had come to this, a final confrontation. They were no longer just up against a corrupt corporation. Now, they were fighting for their lives. They drove through the city streets, the neon lights of the skyline blurring as they made their way toward a safe house. a place that had been prepared months ago, just in case things ever went this far. The city felt eerily quiet as they navigated the unfamiliar roads. For the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He thought about the long road that had brought him here. It had started with a simple desire to make things right, to expose the greed and corruption that had eaten away at society's foundation. But it had become so much more than that. Along the way, they had found each other, Sarah, Liam, and himself, and they had become a family, bound together by a common cause. No matter what happened next, they had each other, and that was the only thing that kept Elon moving forward. The safe house, a remote cabin in the woods miles outside the city, was an old hideaway that had once belonged to a trusted ally of Sarah's. It was simple and isolated, perfect for laying low. They arrived in the early hours of the morning, and as they unpacked the car and moved inside, Elon couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. This was their chance to regroup, to plan their next move. But there was no time to relax. They knew it wasn't over. They had to remain vigilant. The hours seemed to stretch on as they fortified the cabin, checking every window and door, preparing for whatever was to come. Elon sat in front of a large map on the wall, outlining their next steps. They couldn't keep running. They couldn't stay hidden forever. It was time to make their final stand. "Do you think they'll come for us here?" Liam asked, his voice calm but filled with the same unspoken tension that lingered in the air. "They will," Elon said. "Vericorp doesn't leave loose ends. They'll want us silenced. But that's not going to happen." Sarah moved over to the map, her eyes scanning the layout of the area. "We'll need help. We can't take them all on ourselves. If we can draw in the resistance, if we can get enough people behind us." Elon nodded. "It's the only way. We need to rally the support we've been gathering. They can't fight all of us." The hours passed slowly, and as the sun set, the tension in the cabin only grew. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The final battle was about to begin. The phone buzzed again, the same encrypted number flashing on the screen. "Elon," Max's voice came through, tight with fear. "They're closing in. You're running out of time. Get ready. They're coming." Elon's grip tightened on the phone as a surge of adrenaline flooded his system. The moment he had feared had finally arrived. Vericorp wasn't going to wait any longer. The final showdown had begun. The cabin was now a fortress. Every window covered, every door locked, and a sense of quiet desperation hanging in the air. Elon had always been prepared for danger, but this was different. This wasn't just about evading the authorities or avoiding corporate spies. This was the endgame. Vericorp's reach had extended far and wide, and they were coming for them, now more determined than ever. Elon paced the floor, staring out the small cabin window into the dense forest beyond. The fog had rolled in, thick and ominous, creating an eerie barrier between them and the world outside. His fingers drummed nervously on the table as he tried to steady his thoughts. His mind was racing. They needed to stay ahead of Vericorp, but they also needed to make their next move, now. There wasn't much time left. Liam was hunched over a desk, working through the data they'd compiled from Vericorp's infrastructure, still trying to make sense of what they could do next. Sarah was at the cabin's kitchen table, writing down strategies, working out every possible move in their limited arsenal. It had all come down to this. After months of secretive work, covert operations, and narrow escapes, their plan was about to reach its conclusion. One wrong move and everything they'd worked for could fall apart. Elon finally broke the silence. "We need to hit them before they hit us." Sarah looked up from her notes, her face grim but determined. "We can't wait any longer. Vericorp's extraction teams are already on their way. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it gets." Elon turned toward her, a fire in his eyes. "We've spent months preparing. We can't let them stop us now. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about bringing them down once and for all." Liam nodded, a sense of quiet resolve in his eyes. "Agreed. We can't afford to waste this opportunity." The plan they had laid out in the days before now seemed even more vital. They had built a network of allies, anonymous figures who had been waiting for this moment. With their help, they could expose Vericorp in ways that would cripple the corporation beyond repair. But the window of opportunity was narrow. Every second counted. The first sign that Vericorp was closing in came from a sudden surge of encrypted signals flashing across their communications system. The hackers they had in their network were able to intercept the signals. Vericorp was mobilizing. There were multiple incoming teams, all headed in their direction. "They're here," Max's voice came through the encrypted line. "They've activated their special ops. You've got no more than 3 hours before they breach your location." Elon's breath caught in his chest. 3 hours? It wasn't enough time to make a perfect escape, but it was enough to do something, to create chaos, enough to force Vericorp into a situation where they couldn't fight back. "We're not going to escape, Max," Elon said, his voice steady with resolve. "We're going to make them come to us. And when they do, we'll be ready." The next few hours were a blur of frantic action. They fortified every entry point, setting up traps around the perimeter and preparing everything they needed to upload the final set of documents to the press. There was no turning back now. It wasn't just their lives on the line anymore. It was the future of countless innocent people who had suffered under Vericorp's grip. As they worked, Elon's thoughts returned to the moment when it all began. He'd been a businessman, obsessed with numbers, deals, and the machine of capitalism. But through this journey, he had found something deeper. He had found a purpose, and it wasn't about making money. It wasn't about winning. It was about justice, about giving the powerless a voice, making sure that the corrupt couldn't just destroy lives for their own gain. Vericorp might have had money, influence, and power, but they didn't have what Elon now understood was truly priceless: the truth. And the truth was a weapon, one that could tear down even the mightiest empire. As the final hours ticked down, everything was ready. The safe house was fortified. The documents were primed to go live. Their allies were in place, ready to send out the final leak and make it public. But even as they prepared to pull the trigger, a feeling of unease gnawed at Elon's gut. There was something he wasn't prepared for, something he couldn't have anticipated. The forest around the cabin was unervingly quiet. Elon paused in the middle of what he was doing, straining to listen. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the sound of a twig snapping reached his ears, followed by the faintest rustle of leaves. "They're here," Liam said under his breath, his voice tense. "Get ready." The faint noise grew louder, and Elon's heart started to pound in his chest. There was no time left. It was time to execute the plan. "Max, do it now," Elon ordered into the comm. The hacker's voice came through loud and clear. "I'm sending it now. Once it's out, there's no going back." Elon's mind raced as he watched the seconds tick down. There was no turning back, not now. This was their only shot. The cabin door suddenly slammed open, and armed men in tactical gear poured in, rifles raised. Elon's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Sarah and pulled her toward the back room. Liam immediately darted to the side, firing a flashbang from a small device into the doorway, temporarily blinding the intruders. "Go!" Liam shouted. With lightning speed, they moved through the cabin's back door and into the dense woods. The last thing Elon saw before the door slammed shut behind him was the group of mercenaries stumbling from the flashbang, disoriented but quickly regaining their senses. The world outside the cabin was dark, silent, and filled with a foreboding tension. As they sprinted through the underbrush, their feet barely making a sound on the wet earth, Elon's mind raced. They had to make it to the extraction point, a remote landing site they'd arranged in advance. Max's voice crackled through their earpieces. "The documents are out. It's done. Now get the hell out of there." The forest felt like a maze, the trees looming overhead like silent watchers. Every sound, every crack of a branch, felt like an enemy waiting to pounce. Elon could feel the rush of adrenaline coursing through him as they moved faster, pushing forward through the thickening fog. They reached the extraction point just as the first sirens echoed in the distance. The helicopter was waiting for them, its rotor blades cutting through the fog as it hovered in place. Elon, Liam, and Sarah sprinted toward it, their breaths coming in sharp bursts. They were so close. But as they neared the chopper, a flash of movement caught Elon's eye. A figure emerged from the trees ahead, one of Vericorp's men. Without thinking, Elon pushed Sarah and Liam toward the chopper, then spun to face the threat. His heart hammered in his chest as he took a deep breath, the world suddenly feeling all too small. Move. Get in. Liam shouted as the helicopter door opened. Elon took one last look at the figure emerging from the trees, and with one final burst of energy, he dove into the helicopter, slamming the door shut behind him. The helicopter roared to life, and in moments, they were airborne, flying high above the dense woods. Elon exhaled, staring out the window at the vast expanse of the forest below. They had made it out. But as the helicopter flew into the unknown, Elon knew that this was only the beginning. The storm they had unleashed was far from over. They had exposed VeraCorp. They had shown the world the truth. But now, they had to make sure it stayed exposed. VeraCorp would not go down quietly. They would fight to the end. And Elon wasn't done fighting either. The night was unnaturally quiet as the helicopter soared through the sky, its blades slicing through the air like a whispered promise of escape. Below, the forest receded into darkness, fading into nothing more than a blur of shadows. But as Elon looked out at the endless stretch of wilderness, the relief he should have felt was absent. Instead, his stomach churned with a sense of impending dread. They had made it out, yes? They had escaped the immediate danger, and their plan to expose VeraCorp had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. The world knew the truth now. The documents had been leaked. The corporation was reeling from the impact. But something gnawed at Elon, a quiet worry in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't over. Not yet. As the helicopter glided over the sprawling city, he felt the weight of what they had done. The truth they had unearthed was a double-edged sword. The world was waking up to the horrors that VeraCorp had hidden for so long. But what would come after? The ripple effects would be seismic. World economies, political structures, and social systems would be forced to change. It was a revolution waiting to unfold. But revolutions were messy. They often came at a heavy price. Beside him, Sarah sat quietly, her face pale but resolute. She stared out the window, her fingers tapping restlessly on the edge of her seat. Elon could see the burden in her eyes, the same weight he felt pressing down on him. They had succeeded, yes, but the victory came with a cost. They had put everything on the line, including their lives, and in doing so, they had opened a door that could never be closed again. Liam sat across from them, his expression unreadable. He was the quiet one, the strategist. While Elon and Sarah were out in the world making bold moves, Liam had always been the one to keep them grounded, the one who reminded them of the bigger picture. He had always been the voice of reason, but now, his eyes were distant, lost in thought. It was clear the weight of their actions was settling in on him as well. "Do you think it was worth it?" Sarah's voice broke the silence, soft but heavy with the gravity of the question. Her eyes flickered over to Elon, searching his face for some sign of reassurance. Elon didn't answer immediately. The question had lingered on his mind for hours. Was it worth it? The risks they had taken, the lives they had endangered. Was it worth it to bring down a corporation as powerful as VeraCorp? He thought back to the moment when he first realized the depth of VeraCorp's corruption. He had been just a businessman, a man who had once believed that money and power were the ultimate goals. But everything had changed when he saw the faces of those who suffered in the shadows, the lives destroyed by the greed of the few. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady. "It was worth it. We've exposed them, and the truth is out. No one can ignore it now. People will fight for what's right. They'll take action. It has to be worth it." Liam spoke up then, his voice low and thoughtful. "But the world isn't just going to change because we expose the truth. It never is. There are powerful forces at play here, forces that will stop at nothing to maintain their grip on power." Elon nodded, his mind already racing ahead. "I know. We've only just begun. But if we can rally the people, if we can get the momentum going, we can make sure that change is unstoppable. We can't let up now." As the helicopter continued its flight, Elon's thoughts drifted to the unknown. He had seen the wreckage that VeraCorp had left behind, the lives it had shattered. And as much as he wanted to believe that exposing the truth would be enough, a part of him knew the battle was far from over. Hours later, the helicopter landed at a secluded airstrip. A group of their allies, trusted friends and fellow activists, were waiting for them. As they disembarked, The relief of escape finally began to settle in. But Elon could see the unease in the eyes of everyone around him. They were all aware of what was coming next. Sarah pulled him aside as the group began to move toward the safe house. "Elon," she said, her voice tense, "I'm not sure we're ready for what's coming. There's a lot of people who will fight back. And I'm not talking about Vericorp. I'm talking about the people who were profiting from the system we just blew up." Elon looked into her eyes, understanding the fear she was expressing. It wasn't just Vericorp they had to worry about anymore. It was the entire establishment, the people in power who had been complicit, who had benefited from the corruption. They were the ones who would fight tooth and nail to protect their interests. "I know," Elon said quietly, "but we can't stop now. If we do, everything we've fought for will have been for nothing. We need to take this further. We need to make sure the truth doesn't die." Liam joined them then, his face lined with concern. "But how? How do we fight against a system that's been in place for centuries? This isn't just about Vericorp anymore. It's about every single institution that's built on the backs of the people. It's about a world that's been manipulated by power." Elon paused, staring at the darkening sky. His heart felt heavy, but his resolve was clear. "We do it by organizing, by speaking to people, by showing them the truth, just like we've done. We build a movement that's unstoppable, and we do it together." But deep down, Elon knew the fight would only get harder from here. He had awakened something within the world, a hunger for justice, a thirst for truth. But the world wasn't ready for the chaos that would follow. They weren't prepared for the changes that would come crashing down on them, tearing apart the fabric of society. But he also knew one thing. He couldn't stop. He couldn't go back to the person he had been before. There was no turning back. As they entered the safe house, the team began to regroup. Tensions were high, but they all understood the magnitude of what had just happened. The world was shifting, and it wasn't just about Vericorp anymore. It was about everything. The door to the safe house slammed shut behind them, sealing them in a world of uncertainty. And yet, despite the darkness that loomed ahead, Elon could feel the faintest glimmer of hope. They had done something extraordinary. They had changed the world. Now, it was up to them to make sure the world didn't fall apart. The days that followed their escape from the safe house felt like a blur. The world outside was in chaos. Headlines, media outlets, and social networks all buzzing with the exposure of Vericorp's deep corruption. But amidst the clamor of global outrage, Elon found it hard to focus on anything but the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. As the press conferences and interviews piled up, he found himself asking the same question over and over. Had they done the right thing? He had always believed in the power of progress, of pushing humanity forward. He had believed that the truth would always win, that transparency and justice would bring about a better world. But now, sitting in his temporary office, surrounded by piles of media reports and raw data, he realized that the price for truth was higher than he had ever anticipated. Sarah was at the table, going over notes and strategizing their next moves. Liam was on the phone, coordinating with their network of allies. But Elon, as usual, had drifted into a quiet space of his own thoughts. "What now?" Elon asked, his voice a whisper, almost as if he was afraid of hearing the answer. Sarah didn't look up from her work, but replied in her usual calm tone. "Now we wait. We've exposed the truth, Elon. We've done everything we could. The world has seen it. We can't change what we've already done. Now it's up to the people to take it from here." He nodded, but the uncertainty lingered. "I can't help but feel like we're missing something. There's more to this than just exposing the corruption. What if we did all this, and nothing changes?" Liam hung up the phone and turned toward them, his eyes heavy with the same doubt. "You know better than anyone, Elon. Sometimes, it takes more than just exposing the truth. The people who are in power, the ones who benefit from all of this, they won't just go down without a fight. And that fight could take many forms." Elon leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the window, watching the world outside. A world that, despite the scandal, seemed oddly unchanged. Cars still drove down the street, people went about their business, and life continued, as though nothing had happened. For a moment, it all felt futile. The silence was broken by a loud knock at the door. a sharp rap that echoed through the room, making everyone in the safe house jump to attention. Sarah immediately stood up, her hand resting near her sidearm. "Stay low," she whispered. Liam approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. For a second, there was a pause. Then he stepped back and muttered, "It's him." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. The door opened slowly, and a tall figure stepped into the room. His face was familiar, yet strange. A man whose reputation preceded him. A man whose name carried weight. Maxwell Ward, the former CEO of Vericorp. The man whose very existence had been a linchpin in the corruption they had uncovered. Max's face was unreadable as he stepped inside, his sharp blue eyes glancing over the team. He was wearing a simple black jacket, but his posture was that of someone who held power, even in this diminished form. Elon felt the tension rise in the room. "Max," Elon said, his voice a mix of caution and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Max smiled faintly but with no humor. "I'm here to offer you a deal." Elon motioned for him to sit, still processing the unexpected turn of events. "A deal? After everything that's happened, you think you can just waltz in here and offer us anything?" Max leaned forward, his eyes flickering with something that was almost amusement. "I'm not here to play games, Elon. I'm here because I know something you don't." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her hand still near the gun at her waist. "And what's that?" Max's eyes fixed on Elon, his gaze intense. "You think you've won. You think you've exposed Vericorp, but you've only scratched the surface. There's something much bigger at play here. Something you're not prepared for." Liam narrowed his eyes, his suspicion evident. "What are you talking about?" Max didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked over to the window, staring out into the night. For a moment, he looked like a man who was carrying the weight of a world on his shoulders. Then, he spoke again, his voice low and serious. "There's a much larger system behind Vericorp. A system that goes beyond just one company. It's global. It's everywhere. And you've just kicked the hornet's nest." Elon exchanged a look with Sarah and Liam. The tension in the room thickened. "What do you mean?" Elon asked, his voice tight. Max sighed and turned back to face them. "You've exposed Vericorp, yes, but that's just one part of a much larger machine. You think the powers that be will let this slide? They won't. They'll come for you. And when they do, it won't be just Vericorp. It'll be everyone who is invested in the system. The elites, the politicians, the media, the entire infrastructure. You've made powerful enemies, and they won't just sit idly by while you continue to rock the boat." Elon's mind raced, his thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions. Had they really considered the full scope of their actions? Had they prepared for the fallout? Max took a deep breath. "If you want to survive this, you'll need help. I can offer you that help, but only if you're willing to see things for what they really are. This isn't just about a corrupt corporation. It's about the entire system. And that system? It's not going down without a fight." The room was silent as Elon processed the weight of Max's words. For the first time in what felt like weeks, he felt a sense of clarity cut through the fog of uncertainty. The battle they were fighting wasn't just against Vericorp. It was against a much larger, more entrenched system. A system that would fight back with everything it had. Max's offer hung in the air, tempting and dangerous all at once. They could use his knowledge. They could make more allies, expand their reach. But at what cost? And could they trust him? Finally, Elon spoke, his voice steady. "What's your offer?" Max stepped closer, a cold smirk playing at the edges of his lips. "We work together. I've got information, resources, and allies you won't find anywhere else. You want to bring down the system? I'll help you. But you need to understand something. Once you cross this line, there's no going back." Elon looked at Sarah and Liam, searching their faces for any sign of doubt or hesitation. He knew they couldn't stay neutral for much longer. They had come too far, fought too hard. And now, it was time to decide. Was the battle they were waging worth the cost? Could they really bring down the system? Elon exhaled slowly, his voice clear and unwavering. "We're in. Let's bring them down." Max smiled, a glint of admiration in his eyes. Then let's begin. The safe house was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed in on you like the weight of the world. Elon stood by the window, staring out into the night as the city lights flickered like a distant, cold beacon. Max's words echoed in his mind, each one landing heavier than the last. They were not just battling a single corrupt corporation anymore. They were fighting against a global network, an elite web of power, wealth, and influence that spanned across borders and industries. It was almost overwhelming, the sheer enormity of it. But there was no turning back. They had already kicked down the door. Now they had to walk through it. Max had made his offer clear. They could join forces and leverage the vast resources he controlled. But there was no promise of safety, no guarantees. And once they entered this fight, there would be no retreat. Elon had made the decision that night. They would move forward, but not without fully understanding the risks. Sarah and Liam had been quiet after Max's proposition, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah, ever the strategist, had been the first to speak after the silence lingered too long. "Do we trust him?" she asked, her voice low but firm. She wasn't one to make decisions impulsively, and Elon knew she was still weighing the options, the consequences. Max had been the former CEO of VeraCorp, a man who had profited from the very system they were trying to dismantle. The question wasn't just about trusting Max. It was about trusting his information, his motivations, and whether they could work with someone so deeply embedded in the very power structure they were trying to bring down. Liam spoke up then, his expression thoughtful. "The question is, do we have any other choice? We need resources, networks, access. We can't do this alone. And if Max is offering that, along with insider knowledge, then we might not get a better opportunity." Elon felt the weight of their words. They were right. The fight was bigger than any of them had anticipated, and the stakes were too high to play cautiously. They had exposed VeraCorp, but now they needed to do more. They needed to disrupt the system in a way that no one would ever be able to ignore. But still, Elon couldn't shake the unease in his gut. Working with Max meant more than just using his resources. It meant trusting him, even if it meant compromising some of their ideals. "You're right," Elon said finally, turning from the window. "We need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to maintain control of the narrative." Sarah nodded, her eyes sharp with focus. "Let's move forward then. But we need to make sure we're prepared for the fallout. We're not just exposing a corporation anymore. We're exposing a system. And that system won't go down quietly." The following days passed in a flurry of activity. Max was as good as his word. He brought the team access to a vast network of contacts, information, and safe havens they hadn't been able to tap into before. Elon felt like they were diving deeper into a dark world that had been hidden from the public eye for too long. The deeper they went, the more they uncovered. But with every new piece of the puzzle they put together, the more complicated the picture became. This wasn't just about VeraCorp's illegal practices. It wasn't just about the corporation's greed or the human toll they had inflicted. No, it was something far more dangerous. VeraCorp was merely a cog in a much larger machine. They were just one piece of a system that spanned governments, industries, and financial institutions. A system that had existed for decades, carefully concealed behind a veil of power, wealth, and influence. They had exposed the tip of the iceberg, but beneath it lay an ocean of corruption that reached deep into the very heart of society. Max had provided them with intelligence that was both eye-opening and terrifying. It became clear that the people in power had built a vast network of control, a web that extended into the highest levels of government, law enforcement, and the media. They weren't just facing corporate giants. They were facing a global system designed to keep the wealthy in control and the rest of the world in the dark. And the deeper Elon and his team dug, the more they realized that the world was not prepared for the truth they were about to unleash. It would shake the foundations of everything people had believed in, challenging everything from the way economies were structured to the very idea of justice itself. But Elon wasn't backing down. They couldn't afford to. The truth was too important, and it had to be exposed, no matter the consequences. The storm was coming. As the team huddled around the table in their temporary headquarters, the gravity of the situation hit Elon once again. They had their plan. They knew what they had to do. But as they prepared for the final phase of their mission, A part of Elon couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of impending doom. It was one thing to expose the truth. It was another to survive the consequences. Max's intel had made it clear that the forces they were up against would stop at nothing to protect their interests. There would be no mercy, no quarter given. Vericorp was just one piece of the puzzle, but the people behind it, those who benefited from the system, would do whatever it took to crush anyone who threatened their power. Elon could feel the weight of the decision hanging over him, but he knew they had no choice. They had already exposed the system, and they couldn't let it go back into the shadows. Sarah, ever the realist, had prepared for the worst. She had laid out their plan, and they were ready. The final step was to release the remaining documents, the ones that would expose the full extent of the global conspiracy, the ones that would bring everything crashing down. But even as the plan took shape, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a storm that might very well consume them. As the days passed, the tension built. The media was already abuzz with their previous revelations, but this new information, the full extent of the conspiracy, was still under wraps, and that was about to change. They were about to release the final pieces of the puzzle, the documents that would blow the lid off the entire operation. It would be their final move, the one that would set everything in motion. But Elon couldn't help but wonder, would the world be ready? Would the people rise up? Or would they be too afraid to face the truth? The storm was coming. They just had to hope it was a storm that could bring about change. The room was dimly lit. The only sound the low hum of technology and the occasional rustle of papers. Elon stared at the screen in front of him, his mind racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. The final phase of their plan was set in motion. They had the documents, the irrefutable evidence of a global conspiracy that spanned continents, industries, and governments. But as he sat there, with the team gathered around him, a heavy weight pressed down on his chest. This was it, the moment they had been working for, the moment everything would change. Or, at least, that's what they hoped. Sarah paced back and forth, her eyes scanning the final preparations, the logistics of the launch. Liam was at his side, making final adjustments to the system. Everything was in place, every document ready to be released. Yet, no one could ignore the tension that permeated the air. They had done all the right things, gathered the data, built their network of support, and exposed the corruption within Vericorp. But the truth they were about to unveil would change the world in ways none of them could predict. Elon rubbed his temples, the familiar ache returning. He knew that once they hit send, there would be no going back. The system they were about to bring to its knees wasn't just going to lie down and die. It would fight back. Max had warned them. There would be retaliation. They would become targets, and not just from the corporations. Powerful political figures, law enforcement, even the media. Anyone who benefited from the system they were exposing would be on the defensive. The consequences would be far-reaching, and no one could say where the fallout would land. But there was no turning back now. The world had to see the truth. They had already risked too much to stop now. "We're ready," Sarah said, her voice steady, but Elon could hear the underlying tension. Liam nodded, adjusting the encryption systems one last time. "The moment we release this, it'll be out of our hands. We can't control how the world reacts, but we can't keep waiting either. We have to act." Elon turned to face them both, a deep breath escaping his lungs. "Once we do this, there's no undoing it. There's no hiding. The whole world will know." "I know," Sarah replied. "But the world needs to know, Elon. It's time." The clock on the wall ticked down. It was a countdown, one they couldn't stop. The documents were ready to go. A simple click, and everything would change. Max's voice had haunted Elon's thoughts throughout the night. The billionaire's words echoed through his mind. "You're not just exposing a corporation. You're exposing a system. And that system will fight back. There will be consequences, and they will be violent." For a moment, Elon's eyes flickered to the news feed on the monitor. The world was already reacting to the first few revelations about Vericorp's misdeeds. The headlines were everywhere. People were angry. They were demanding accountability. But the real storm was yet to come. "Elon," Sarah said, interrupting his thoughts, "the world is watching." Elon looked at her, meeting her eyes. She was right. The media frenzy over the initial revelations was building into a wave. The next wave, the release of the full, damning documents, would send that wave crashing down onto the unsuspecting public. It would be a moment of reckoning. "We'll need to be ready for anything," he said, his voice tinged with resolve. "We've prepared for the fallout, but we can't predict how far this will go. Once this is out, there's no going back." The moment of truth arrived. Elon stood up, walking over to the control panel in front of him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, his mind clouded by the gravity of the decision he was about to make. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. This was about igniting a revolution that would change the fabric of society, the very nature of power. The rest of the team watched him, their faces a mixture of anticipation and fear. This wasn't just their fight anymore. This was the world's fight. They had the power to set something in motion that could never be undone. And with that power came a responsibility that weighed on Elon's shoulders like 1,000 tons. He hit enter. The documents were released. The screen flickered as the encrypted files were sent out across every possible channel. They were now in the hands of journalists, activists, government officials, and citizens all over the world. The truth was no longer something they could hide or suppress. It was out there, raw, unfiltered, dangerous. And as the first headlines began to appear on the screen, the full weight of what they had done came crashing down. The immediate reaction was overwhelming. Social media exploded with outrage. Journalists scrambled to analyze and verify the information. Leaders of governments scrambled to issue statements, trying to distance themselves from the scandal, but their words felt hollow. They couldn't run from the truth anymore. The conspiracy they had uncovered was far bigger than anyone had realized. It wasn't just one corporation or a single scandal. It was a network of power that reached into every corner of the world. And now, the world knew. But with the release of the documents, a new wave of fear began to settle over Elon and his team. The people they had exposed weren't just going to sit back and take this. They would retaliate. The people who controlled this system would not go down without a fight. Elon's phone rang. The name on the screen made his heart race. It was Max. "Now that it's done," Max's voice crackled over the line. "Brace yourselves. They won't let this go quietly. They'll be coming for you." "What do you mean?" Elon asked, his voice tight. "They'll stop at nothing. You've just declared war on the system. It's not just corporations you've targeted now. It's the very people in power. The ones who control everything. You think they'll let you keep breathing after this?" Elon's heart skipped a beat. Max was right. The battle wasn't just about Vericorp anymore. It was about the whole system, and that system would come for them with everything it had. The team watched as the news cycle shifted into overdrive. The documents had caused an international storm, but now the real test began. What would the world do with this information? Would they rise up, demand change, or would they succumb to fear and inaction? Elon felt a deep sense of uncertainty settle over him. It was hard to tell if they had done the right thing. They had brought down Vericorp, exposed the ugly truth of a corrupt system. But at what cost? Max's warning echoed in his ears. "You've made powerful enemies, and they'll stop at nothing to protect their interests." The storm was here, and they had just made themselves the target. The world had shifted beneath their feet. The hours following the release of the documents felt like a blur to Elon and his team. News outlets scrambled to verify the authenticity of the files, but the weight of the truth was undeniable. The revelations sparked massive protests in cities around the world. People were demanding accountability, marching for justice, for a new system. They had been lied to, manipulated, and controlled for too long. But with every powerful voice calling for change, there were even more powerful forces that would do everything to suppress it. Elon sat in the dimly lit room, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he watched the news unfold. The protests were only the beginning. The real battle was going to play out in the shadows. The people who controlled the system weren't going to stand idly by while the world they built crumbled around them. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy," Sarah said, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was calm, but Elon could see the unease in her eyes. They had taken the first step, but the road ahead was paved with uncertainty and danger. Liam was pacing, tapping his fingers nervously on the back of a chair. We've already seen some reaction. Financial markets are volatile, governments are scrambling, and now the corporations are starting to fight back. It's only a matter of time before they start coming after us. The urgency in Liam's voice was unmistakable. They had exposed the truth, but the price of that truth was steep. Powerful individuals, entities, and governments had far more resources, influence, and control than they could ever hope to match. Elon took a deep breath and turned toward the others. We knew the risks, but now it's time to prepare for what comes next. We can't go back. We need to find a way to stay ahead of them. Max's warning had been clear. They would stop at nothing to protect their system. Now, Elon had to think about survival. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about protecting themselves from the oncoming storm. Do we have any idea who's behind it all? Elon asked, his voice low but determined. Sarah nodded. We've been piecing things together. There are too many players involved for it to be just one person or one corporation. This is a global network, with strings pulled by people who have been in power for decades. Governments, tech giants, defense contractors. The money trail leads to the highest levels. But we don't have all the names yet. That's what we need to find out, Elon replied. The more we can expose, the more difficult it'll be for them to shut us down. We need to get ahead of them, predict their moves. The more people we have on our side, the better. Max had given them access to a network of people who could help, but even with those resources, the enemies they had made were too powerful. Every move they made now had to be calculated, strategic. They couldn't afford mistakes. Just then, Elon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was a secure message from an anonymous contact. They know where you are. Get out now. His heart skipped a beat. They hadn't been wrong. The system was coming after them. Elon, what is it? Sarah asked, noticing his change in expression. They found us, he said grimly. They know where we are. Within minutes, the team was packing up. The safe house they had been using was compromised. Elon's mind raced, the panic rising in his chest, but he forced himself to focus. They had been expecting this. The enemies they had made were not going to play by the rules. They would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. Max had warned them that the fight was going to be dirty. There was no easy path out now. We have to leave. Now, Elon said. His voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Liam grabbed his laptop and backup drives, shoving them into a bag. Do you think they're going to come for us directly? Or are they going to use the media and law enforcement to make it look like an accident? We can't assume anything, Elon said, his eyes scanning the room for anything they might need. We need to disappear for a while. We'll contact our allies, get out of the city, and lay low. Sarah was already on the phone, coordinating with their network to find them a safe route out. Every minute counted. But it was clear now, the system wasn't just trying to silence them. It was trying to erase them. The files they had released were more than just a threat. They were a declaration of war. And those who controlled the system would stop at nothing to eliminate the threat Elon and his team posed. As the team gathered their things and moved toward the exit, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were entering a new phase of the battle. They had exposed the truth, but the real fight, survival, had just begun. Hours later, as they drove through the night, Elon tried to push the mounting anxiety out of his mind. They had managed to slip past the initial pursuit, but they knew they couldn't run forever. The truth was out there now, but with it came the wrath of a system that would not go down quietly. I don't know how long we can keep this up, Liam said, staring out of the window at the dark landscape rushing by. They'll eventually catch up with us. We'll stay ahead, Elon said firmly. We have to. Sarah spoke up, her voice calm but laced with tension. We need to make sure we're not just running. We have a responsibility now. People are counting on us. We can't hide forever. We need to turn this fight back on them. Elon nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. They had made an impossible choice, and there was no turning back now. But Sarah was right. They couldn't hide. They had to keep pushing forward. If they stopped, everything they had fought for would be for nothing. Once we're safe, Elon said, his voice steady, we go back on the offensive. We take them down, piece by piece. But as the hours passed and they drove deeper into the night, Elon knew the stakes had never been higher. They weren't just fighting to expose the truth anymore. They were fighting for their lives. And if they didn't keep moving, if they didn't keep fighting, everything they had uncovered, the corruption, the lies, the stolen power, would slip away into the darkness, just like everything else. And so, they kept moving. Elon's mind was a whirlwind. As the team continued their high-speed flight to an unknown location, every second felt like an eternity. Every twist and turn of the road seemed to hold the weight of everything they had uncovered. The truth, the fight, the consequences. The gravity of their situation was starting to sink in. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption anymore. It was about survival. And now, the stakes had never been higher. They had spent years working up to this point, gathering evidence, infiltrating the system, and building alliances. But nothing had prepared them for the reality of what they were up against now. The people in power, those who had run the system for decades, were no longer just abstract figures. They were real, and they were coming for them. As the car sped down empty highways, Elon tried to push aside the mounting anxiety. He had always been a strategist, someone who thought 5 steps ahead. But now, in the face of an enemy that was vast, faceless, and deeply entrenched, he was uncertain. How could they possibly fight back against something so powerful? How much farther? Liam's voice broke through the tension, the question one they had been asking for hours. "We're almost there," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "This is the safe house Max told us about. We'll lay low here, get in touch with our contacts, and figure out what the next move is." Max had been their connection to the underground network, the people who had helped them gather the information that brought the truth to light. But even Max had warned them that the safe houses wouldn't protect them forever. This fight was going to require more than just hiding out. They needed a plan, a real one. Elon glanced at Sarah, then at Liam. The uncertainty in their eyes mirrored his own. They were all in this together, but for the first time, he could feel the weight of the responsibility they carried. When they arrived at the safe house, Elon immediately began making calls, contacting their allies and network, trying to assess their next steps. They couldn't afford to stay still for too long. The system they had exposed was like a shadow, always lurking, always watching. They had to keep moving, keep pressing forward, if they had any chance of making a real difference. Sarah was at his side, tapping away at her laptop, trying to find any updates on the situation. The last thing they wanted was to be caught in a web of lies or misinformation. The media, already flooded with speculation and panic, had become another battlefield in this war. Every word they said, every piece of evidence they shared, was twisted, spun into something else. The truth had become an elusive concept, slipping through their fingers at every turn. "I've been tracking the movements of Vericorp's legal team," Sarah said, her voice low but intense. "They're already mobilizing their lawyers and PR people, trying to control the narrative. But they're also moving behind the scenes. There's more to this than we realized. They've got people everywhere." Elon nodded grimly. "I expected as much. The only way they'll let this go is if they can bury it. We have to make sure they can't do that. We need to hit them where it hurts," Liam added. "Financially, politically. If we can take down their ability to function, we cripple them. But we're going to need more than just leaks and protests. We need leverage," Elon said, his voice cold and calculating. "Something they can't ignore. Something that will make them squirm." The plan began to take shape. It wasn't just about staying on the defensive anymore. They needed to launch an all-out offensive. If they were going to expose the full scope of the system's corruption, they had to target the heart of the beast. But that's when the risks became even more apparent. This wasn't going to be some small-scale operation anymore. If they were going to expose every dirty secret, every backdoor deal, every hidden agenda, they needed access to the highest echelons of power. Elon leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. They were walking on a razor's edge now. If they made one wrong move, they could all be dead. "I don't know how much longer we have," Sarah said, breaking his reverie. "We're running out of time. The longer we wait, the more control they have." Liam was already plotting out their next moves on a digital map. "If we go after the financials, we can start by exposing the tax havens they've been hiding in. That'll disrupt their entire structure. But that's just the beginning. Elon's gaze narrowed as he thought about the next phase of their plan. We need to hit them where it matters most. We go after their allies, politicians, military contractors, people in positions of power. We need names, and we need evidence. But we don't have time to sit around gathering information forever, Sarah said. We've already been targeted, and they know we're still out here. If we wait too long, they'll come for us, and we'll be out of options. You're right, Elon agreed. We need to act fast, but we can't be reckless. We need to keep one step ahead of them. As they strategized, a strange sense of urgency settled over them. They weren't just trying to survive anymore. They were trying to win, and the line between victory and defeat was razor thin. They had to make sure they had everything in place before they launched their next move. Every connection, every ally had to be solid. Every document they had collected needed to be safely encrypted and backed up. If the wrong person got their hands on the evidence, everything they had worked for could be destroyed in an instant. Elon ran his hand over his face, trying to focus. They had come too far to turn back now. They had already exposed the corruption to the world, and they couldn't let it slip through their fingers. Suddenly, a message pinged on Elon's phone, the encrypted app alerting him to a new message. He quickly opened it, his eyes scanning the words. We have a way to take them down, but you need to meet us. In person. It was from Max, the one person who had always been a step ahead. Elon's pulse quickened. They had spent weeks coordinating with Max's network, but they had never met in person. Now, it seemed like the time had come. But meeting meant more risk. It meant exposure. It meant they had to trust their instincts. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing his sudden shift in demeanor. It's Max. He says he has a way to take them down, but we need to meet him in person. Liam raised an eyebrow. Is it worth the risk? Elon thought for a moment. They had no choice. If Max was offering something that could turn the tide, they had to take it. But it also meant they had to move quickly. We have no other choice, Elon said. We take the risk. We meet Max. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. They had to leave the safe house, move quickly and silently, and stay off the radar. Max had been the only person they could trust in this mess, and if he had a solution, it could mean the difference between life and death. As they made their way to the meeting point, Elon couldn't shake the nagging feeling that time was running out. The people they were up against were powerful and ruthless, but so were they, and they weren't backing down. The air in the car was thick with anticipation. Every passing mile felt like a step deeper into the unknown, into a future that was slipping through their fingers. Elon sat in the back, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was elsewhere, shifting, calculating, uncertain. They were about to meet Max, the one person who had been their guiding light in the dark. But even with Max, they weren't sure who they could trust anymore. As they drove, the streets grew quieter, the lights dimmer. Elon could feel the weight of the city pressing down on him. Every turn, every shadow, seemed to carry the threat of danger. Do you trust him? Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. Max had always been the one with the answers, the one who seemed to know just a little more than everyone else. But trust was a fragile thing. It wasn't something you gave lightly when you were fighting an enemy that would destroy everything you believed in. I have to, Elon said, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. We don't have any other options. Max has been the only one who's been consistently ahead of the game. Liam, who had been silently watching the passing scenery, now spoke up. It's just hard to shake the feeling that everyone's got an agenda, even Max. We don't know what's really going on behind the scenes. We can't afford to think like that, Elon replied, his tone sharp. We can't question everything now. If we do, we'll never get anywhere. Sarah remained quiet, her gaze fixed on her phone as she checked for any updates. But Elon could tell she was uneasy. They all were. They had been operating on a level of suspicion for so long that it was hard to know who to trust, even the people who had been with them from the beginning. When they arrived at the meeting spot, a dilapidated warehouse at the edge of town, it was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the city far off in the distance, the occasional creak of metal, and their own breaths as they stepped out of the car. They had arranged to meet Max at midnight, under the cover of darkness. No one would be able to see them. But as Elon stepped out into the cold night air, a feeling of dread washed over him. Something wasn't right. Sarah locked the car behind them, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "This place gives me the creeps," she muttered. Liam checked his phone again, frowning. "Max said to meet him here, but I don't see anyone." "I don't like it," Elon said. "We need to be careful." They approached the warehouse cautiously, each step feeling like it was taking them deeper into a trap. The door was slightly ajar. Elon pushed it open, and the faint smell of mildew hit them. The shadows inside seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. "Max?" Elon called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. There was no answer. They moved further into the warehouse, their footsteps muffled by the worn floorboards. Every inch of the place felt like it was closing in on them. Elon's instincts were screaming at him to turn back, but just as they reached the center of the room, the lights flickered on, blinding them for a moment. When their eyes adjusted, the sight that greeted them froze them in their tracks. Max was standing in the center of the room, but he wasn't alone. Surrounding him were several men in dark suits, their faces masked. They weren't the allies they had expected to find. These were men who carried the unmistakable air of power and control. "Max?" Elon started, but the confusion in his voice was evident. Max looked up at him, his face expressionless. "Elon, Sarah, Liam, I see you've made it this far." His voice was flat, almost cold. It was a tone Elon had never heard from him before. "What's going on here?" Sarah demanded, stepping forward. "This isn't what we agreed upon." Max's lips curled into a thin smile. "Oh, you poor fools. You really thought I was on your side, didn't you?" Elon's heart sank as the realization hit him. It had all been a lie. They had trusted Max, believed in him, but now the truth was staring them in the face. Max wasn't their ally. He was part of the system they had been fighting against. "You're working for them," Elon said quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. Max chuckled darkly. "I've been working for them from the beginning. You were never meant to win. You were always meant to be pawns in a game far bigger than you could comprehend." Liam stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Why? Why betray us?" Max's smile deepened. "Because I've seen the bigger picture. You think exposing the truth will save the world? You think you can just tear down the system with a few leaked documents? You're naive. The system is bigger than any one of us. It's built on power, and it always will be. And he paused, his eyes cold. "I have my own place in that power." Suddenly, the men in the dark suits moved forward, blocking the exit. The team was trapped. There was no way out. Elon took a step back, his mind racing. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low but determined. "You can't control everything." Max's laugh echoed in the empty warehouse. "Control? You think I want control? No, I'm just a cog in the machine. The real power, well, that's not something you'll ever understand. But don't worry. I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to think about it." With a quick motion, one of the men stepped forward, pulling out a briefcase. He opened it to reveal a set of documents, evidence that was too dangerous for Elon and his team to possess. "Take them," Max said, his voice taking on an almost bored tone. "We were never meant to change anything. The world isn't ready for change, and neither are you." As the men closed in on them, Elon's mind was already racing. This was the moment they had feared. They had been betrayed, sold out by someone they had trusted. But they couldn't give up now. The stakes were too high. They had to fight their way out. But it wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about survival. And with every passing second, the walls seemed to close in tighter. They were fighting not only for their lives, but for the future of a world that seemed to have forgotten what truth even looked like. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the betrayal set in. Max, the person who had seemed to be their ally, was now their captor. Every inch of the warehouse felt like it was closing in on them. The men in suits surrounded them, their movements calculated, deliberate. There was no way out. But Elon wasn't ready to give up. He had fought too long, too hard to let this be the end. His mind raced, analyzing every possible move, every chance of survival. Max stepped closer, his face cold, almost pitying. "You really thought you could change the world, didn't you? You're too small, too insignificant to make a difference. This is the way things are. This is the way they've always been. Elon's voice was steady, but his words were sharp. You're wrong, Max. We may be small, but we're not powerless. And we're not done yet. Max's lips curled into a mocking smile. You still don't get it, do you? You're out of your depth, Elon. You've always been. But don't worry, I'll make sure your story ends quietly. One of the men in suits stepped forward, his hand reaching toward Elon. But before he could make contact, Sarah's voice rang out. Don't touch him. In one swift motion, she grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and swung it at the man, knocking him off balance. The distraction was enough. Elon reacted instantly, grabbing a piece of broken glass from the floor and using it as a weapon. With a fierce movement, he lunged forward, slashing at the man who had been closing in on him. The man staggered back in shock. Get down, Liam yelled, pulling Sarah behind cover as the tension in the room escalated. Elon's mind was a blur of action. He wasn't a fighter by nature, but his survival instincts were kicking in. The element of surprise was on their side, and they needed to use it to their advantage. The men in suits had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Elon lunged forward again, knocking another man to the ground. The warehouse was chaotic now, the sounds of shuffling feet, the crash of metal against stone, and the frantic breathing of his team filling the space. They were outnumbered, but they weren't outmatched. Not yet. Go. We have to get out of here. Elon shouted, his voice commanding. They couldn't afford to stay and fight forever. They needed to escape, and they needed to do it now. Liam, always quick on his feet, was already at the door, prying it open. The exit was in sight, but they weren't free yet. The rest of the men in suits were closing in, and the warehouse had become a battleground. Time was running out. Sarah and Liam ran for the door, but before they could make it, Max's voice rang out, cold and unyielding. Don't even think about it. Elon turned just in time to see Max's hand move toward a hidden control panel on the wall. A moment later, the warehouse doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in the room like a death knell. They were trapped. No! Elon shouted, pounding on the door. The adrenaline coursing through him made everything feel like it was happening in slow motion. Max's voice was almost a whisper now, like a final declaration of victory. You're done. All your efforts, wasted. You're not going anywhere. But Elon wasn't about to let this be the end. He looked at Sarah and Liam, their faces etched with the same determination that mirrored his own. They had come too far to let it all end in this empty warehouse, at the mercy of someone they thought they could trust. Elon's eyes flicked to the walls of the warehouse. There had to be another way out. His gaze fell on a vent above them, a small shaft that led out of the building. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. Sarah, Liam, Elon shouted, pointing toward the vent. Up there. We can get out through there. Without hesitation, Liam bolted toward the corner where the vent was located, using the crates stacked around the warehouse for leverage. Sarah followed, her eyes never leaving their enemies. Max's men were regaining their composure, advancing slowly, but Elon was already ahead of them. He had to buy his team time. Max's eyes flashed with irritation. You're not getting away, Elon. This is where it ends. Elon ignored him. His thoughts were laser-focused on one thing: survival. They had come too far to let Max's betrayal be their downfall. Elon, Liam shouted. We need to move. With one last glance at Max, Elon turned and ran toward the vent. He could hear the thundering footsteps of the men closing in on them, but it didn't matter. They had to move. Liam reached the vent first, his fingers fumbling with the latch. Help me, he yelled. Elon and Sarah rushed over, yanking the vent cover off. There wasn't much time. With the vent now open, Elon was the first to climb through, pulling himself into the dark, narrow shaft. Sarah followed, her heart pounding in her chest. Liam was last, the sound of footsteps growing louder as the men in suits chased after them. Come on, Elon urged, his voice echoing in the tight space. We can make it out of here, just keep moving. The vent shaft was cramped, and they had to move quickly. It wasn't long before they heard the sound of banging behind them. The men were following, trying to figure out how to access the ventilation system. They had no time to waste. The shaft twisted and turned, and the air grew stale. Elon's breath was ragged, but he pushed forward, determined not to let this be their last fight. He could feel the weight of everything they had been through pressing on him, but it was also the thing that drove him forward. The exit of the vent was a small hatch on the roof of the building. Elon reached it first, using all his strength to pry it open. He could feel the cool night air on the other side. They were so close. Elon, Sarah gasped. Hurry. With one final heave, Elon pulled the hatch open, and the night sky stretched out before them. They were free. But as they emerged from the building, the feeling of victory was short-lived. They weren't out of danger yet. They still had to get away from the warehouse, and from the people who were hunting them. The team raced across the rooftop, jumping from one building to the next, using every bit of cover they could find. The sound of sirens echoed through the city, growing louder by the second. They had to keep moving. They had to stay ahead of their enemies. In the distance, Elon saw a small alleyway, and they made a beeline for it, disappearing into the shadows. They had escaped the warehouse, but the war was far from over. Elon's heart was still racing, but there was a fire in his chest that had not been there before. Max's betrayal had stung, but it had also reminded him of something important. They couldn't afford to trust anyone. The only person they could rely on now was themselves, and they were going to keep fighting, no matter what. The cold night air filled Elon's lungs as he crouched behind a dumpster in the alleyway, his heart pounding from the adrenaline. The escape had been close, too close, and every moment since had felt like a race against time. He could still hear the faint echo of sirens in the distance, but for now, they were safe. Sarah and Liam were already looking ahead, trying to plan their next move, but Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They were no longer just up against the system. They were up against an enemy who knew how to play the game, someone who knew them better than they knew themselves. We need to figure out what our next move is, Sarah said quietly, her voice strained. She had been through a lot, and the tension of the past few hours had left its mark on her, but there was determination in her eyes. Liam nodded. Max isn't the only threat we're facing. There's more at play here. We need to expose everything. Elon took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow. It felt like they had been in this fight for a lifetime. And yet, despite all the betrayals, all the dangers, they were still standing. But now, more than ever, they needed a plan. We expose everything, Elon said, his voice steady, the weight of his words settling around them. But not the way they expect. We don't just tear down the system. We make sure that when it falls, it doesn't just leave chaos behind. We rebuild it. Sarah and Liam exchanged looks, and for the first time, Elon could see that spark of hope returning in their eyes. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something bigger. They were fighting for the future. Back in the shadows of the city, a plan was already beginning to take shape. Elon had always believed in the power of innovation to change the world, but he had come to realize that change didn't just happen on its own. It took something more, something that required the courage to stand up, even when it seemed impossible. He pulled out his phone and began to type. We need a safe place to regroup. We'll take everything we've learned, all the data we've gathered, and put it together. We can't let Max's betrayal be in vain. This is just the beginning. Hours later, they were back at their temporary hideout, a small, unassuming apartment in the heart of the city. The space was bare, but for now, it would do. The walls felt like they were closing in, but Elon kept reminding himself that it was just a matter of time before they could turn the tables. Sarah pulled out a laptop, and together, they began combing through the documents, files, and codes they had retrieved from the warehouse. Every piece of information was vital. Every second counted. We need to find the link, Elon said, his eyes scanning the screen. There's always a chain. If we can find the right link, we'll bring them down. Liam paced back and forth, a sense of urgency in his steps. They'll be looking for us. They'll be hunting us down. We're not just running from them anymore, Elon replied, a glint of determination in his eyes. We're going to make them chase us, and we're going to make sure we leave them with nothing. It didn't take long for Elon to uncover something he had been searching for. A name. a connection that had remained hidden in plain sight. The deeper they dug, the more they realized the system Max had been protecting wasn't just a corporate empire. It was a network of power that stretched across governments, tech giants, and even some of the most influential people in the world. Elon stared at the screen, his hands trembling as he processed the information. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption anymore. It was about revealing the puppet masters, the ones who controlled everything from the shadows. "We've got it," Elon whispered. "This is it. This is the link we need." The revelation hit him hard. The people behind the curtain had known about their every move, their every plan. Max wasn't just a traitor. He had been working for a force far more dangerous, one that had its tendrils everywhere. But now, it was time to turn the tables. The following morning, Elon, Sarah, and Liam were on the move again, this time with a clear mission. They had to take the information they had uncovered and expose it to the world. It was no longer about making an impact within the system. It was about completely dismantling it. They went underground, making sure no one was following them. They knew they couldn't trust anyone, not anymore. But their goal was clear. They weren't just going to be hunted. They were going to fight back, and they were going to make the world watch. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with concern. "If we expose this, there's no going back." Elon nodded, his expression unwavering. "There's no other choice. We've already lost too much. But if we don't do this now, then everything we've fought for will be in vain." Liam clapped him on the back, his face grim but resolute. "Let's do it then. Let's make sure we're remembered for what we're about to do." They had no idea what would happen next, but they knew one thing for sure. This fight was far from over, and they would make sure that the world knew the truth. Back at the heart of the system, Max watched the events unfold. His face was unreadable as he observed the leaks, the information being spread like wildfire across the web. "You should have known better than to think you could control everything, Max," a voice from the shadows said. It was familiar, but Max didn't flinch. He had known this moment was coming, but it wasn't over yet. He wasn't out of tricks. "Don't worry," Max said, his eyes narrowing. "It's not over. We'll find them. And when we do, it won't just be their lives that we take." But something in his voice faltered. For the first time, there was a hint of doubt. He had underestimated Elon and his team, and now the stakes were higher than ever. As Elon, Sarah, and Liam worked tirelessly to expose the system's dark secrets, they knew the hardest part was still ahead of them. They had exposed the link, the puppet masters controlling everything. But the world wasn't ready for the truth. They had to prepare for the fallout. The fight wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about creating a new world. A world where power was no longer controlled by a select few, but by the people themselves. And in that fight, they weren't alone. They had sparked something far bigger than themselves. A revolution was brewing, and this time, it wouldn't be stopped. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?